Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started to respect everyone's time. My name's Joe Perdetto. I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs and the Public Information Officer. Thank you so much for being here and being a part of this education process. Tonight, we have a presentation. It'll start with a video. Many of you have already seen it, so you're free to check out for 13 or so minutes until it's over. After that, our Director of Director of Finance, Phil White, will go over some detailed slides. This is all part of a series of presentations the city is doing to get education out on Measure S, which is a 1% sales tax coming up in November. The city cannot advocate one way or the other on the measure, but we can educate. So this is part of that effort. The video will cover some of the trends in the city now, and we'll also cover some of the issues we're facing now or coming forward, and kind of explain where Measure S fits into this, and then Phil will go into more details and cover some of the question and answer period from there. So before I get started, I do want to say that we've been getting a lot of feedback that residents feel that there's some of the consequences of not passing the sales tax comes across as a scare tactic or a threat. And I just want to say that we're aware of that's what we're hearing. And one of the reasons the city council passed a resolution stating what would happen if the sales tax does not pass is to state in factual terms what will happen. So that's already been approved and kind of outlines the cuts that will happen if it doesn't pass. So if it gets your attention, hopefully it will engage us in dialogue. Some people have taken the opportunity, and I see some of you here who've come and sat down with Phil and his team to go over budgets and audits and really go line to line and talk about fun things like cutting my department and my position, which I don't take personally. I understand it. It's legitimate discourse, and that's what we're here for. Nothing's off the table. So with that, we'll go ahead and play the presentation and move on to your questions and answers.
Hi, Yucaipa. I'm Chris Mann, your city manager. But I'm not just your city manager, I'm also your neighbor. Like you, I live here in Yucaipa, and I love this town. I chose Yucaipa almost a decade ago because I was drawn to the natural beauty of the mountains, its more rural, small-town feel, and most importantly, the people who make up our community. Yucaipa is a safe, friendly, patriotic place because of the people who live here. It's like a little bit of Americana right here in Southern California. I want Yucaipa to hold on to these attributes so that my kids can grow up in such a wonderful place. But over the past few years, our small-town USA has been facing some serious challenges. Homelessness and drug addiction, along with related crime and blight, were plaguing our community and getting worse each year. Roads and city facilities were falling into disrepair, while at the same time, the city was spending millions on projects such as the Performing Arts Center and roundabouts. Morale at City Hall was low, and staffing levels were insufficient to provide adequate services to our growing population. There was a general sense in the community that the city was headed in the wrong direction. Following the election in 2022, the City Council understood these issues and took bold and decisive action to correct course. Big changes were made here at City Hall, starting at the top. Over the past almost year and a half since I started as city manager, at the direction and leadership of the City Council, we have refocused your city government on the things that really matter to residents, public safety being the top priority. We have developed a homeless strategic plan and launched the Solutions-Oriented Policing, or SOP, team. The SOP team hits the streets every day, making contact with each homeless individual they encounter. They lead with a helping hand, offering to connect individuals with shelter and with whatever services they need. But at the same time, the SOP team aggressively enforces the law. While it is not a crime to be homeless, it should also not be an excuse to commit crime. This program has seen tremendous success in its first 8 months of operations, having drastically lowered the number of homeless individuals on our streets. Closely related, we have been conducting monthly enforcement activities that we refer to as saturation operations. For 1 or 2 days each month, our public safety department has organized a large number of sheriff's deputies, probation officers, code enforcement officers, and other public safety personnel to flood the streets of Yucaipa, targeting known drug houses and serial offenders. This program has successfully taken dozens of dangerous criminals off our streets. The City Council and this administration understand that public safety is government's #1 priority. Now let's talk about our roads. Yucaipa's roads need a lot of work. Because of our more rural and less densely developed community, we are more spread out than most cities with similar populations. That means we have more miles of roads with fewer people paying into the system than most cities. Maintaining our 209 miles of public roads is very expensive, so we've taken a three-pronged approach to correcting this problem. First, additional roundabout projects that have not begun construction have been shelved, and those resources redirected to maintaining existing roads. There is one more roundabout project coming on County Line Road and Calamasa Boulevard, but this is primarily a City of Calamasa project, and the bulk of the funding is from federal grants. But Yucaipa's transportation dollars have been refocused on our existing network of streets. This fiscal year alone, $4.1 million of restricted gas tax and Measure I funds will be spent on repairing our roads. Second, the city needed to get better about responding more quickly to potholes and other emergency road repairs. With limited in-house staffing, the city implemented a system of utilizing a list of outside contractors to supplement our full-time public works staff. In addition, functionality was added to the Yucaipa app so that residents can now quickly and easily report potholes. Since implementing these measures, responsiveness has increased considerably, with the average response time from report to completion down to just a few days. Third, moving forward, new development must pay for itself. The maintenance of roads built as part of new housing projects must be covered by revenue generated from those developments. It is not fair and no longer sustainable for current residents to shoulder the financial burden of providing services to new developments. Transparency is another area that needed to be addressed. Looking to improve transparency, accountability, and public trust in local government by providing increased access to public information, meaningful engagement, and adherence to ethical principles, in March of last year, the City Council approved the Yucaipa Sunshine Ordinance. Among other provisions, the ordinance requires that City Council meetings be broadcast in video, which had not been done previously, that all labor agreements and employment contracts be posted on the city's website, that planning applications and related documents be posted on the city's website during the public review period, that the public be invited to attend and participate in state-mandated ethics trainings for public officials, and that a communications plan be developed and implemented to increase stakeholder engagement and community understanding of city initiatives and services. In addition, the city has held about a half dozen community and town hall meetings on various issues of particular interest to the community, and has conducted polling to gauge public sentiment on a variety of topics. When it comes to land use and development, the city is now focused on attracting the right kind of projects. While we must meet state mandates related to housing, simply pushing for as many rooftops as possible, no matter the location, is an irresponsible and failed strategy. We also need appropriate commercial development that can provide sales and property tax revenue for city services, reducing the need for revenue from new or increased taxes alone. We need projects that provide amenities residents want, revenues the city needs, and help the city to meet state mandates, while at the same time protecting the natural beauty and unique nature we've all come to love about Yucaipa. While there is still much work to be done, I am confident that overall Yucaipa is headed in the right direction. However, we are now facing one of our biggest challenges yet, and that relates to our budget. Leading up to about 2008, Yucaipa had historically run a surplus and had built significant reserves in the general fund to the tune of $70 million. Starting in about 2009, the city began building major infrastructure projects. Facilities such as stormwater basins, the community center, the police station, parks, and the Performing Arts Center. Fantastic amenities, to be sure, but these projects came at a cost of tens of millions of dollars, cutting deeply into the city's reserves. Of course, once a facility is built, there are significant ongoing costs of maintaining and staffing the facility. If you build it, they will come, was the strategy. Build infrastructure that leads to rooftops. Once rooftops come, commercial will come. Commercial development will provide needed revenue. The problem is that the commercial development has not materialized as quickly as projected. Costs have risen steeply, particularly in relation to public safety. We've been relying on our reserves, which is not sustainable long term. If nothing changes, projections show that we'll run out of money by 2028 or 2029. The time to act is now. We must either establish additional revenue streams or reduce service levels. Now, some have asked, if the city is running a deficit, why haven't we slashed our budget? Why haven't we cut staffing or reduced salaries? Well, it's a good question. It's a valid question, and we may get to that point. 2 months after starting on the job as city manager, we held an emergency city council meeting at the Performing Arts Center where we raised the red flag about coming budget challenges. While we were not yet in a crisis, as the city has reserves upon which we can draw for several years, we realized that a long-term solution must be identified and implemented. Before simply slashing staff positions and eliminating services that residents have grown accustomed to, the council wanted to make sure that all options were thoroughly researched and that a plan was put into place to restore structural balance. The council's direction was to maintain, and in some cases enhance, service levels over the next 2 budget cycles, while at the same time working to find a long-term solution. And we have done just that. Over the past months, Finance Department staff, along with our Governmental Affairs Office, have researched revenue streams available to municipal governments that Yucaipa might not be taking advantage of today. In addition, all city operations, including our existing contracts, were reviewed to identify opportunities for increased efficiency and revenue generation. In early June, we released a financial fixer tool, which lists the leading ways identified to increase revenue and to cut costs. The tool presents these options in an interactive format, allowing residents to click their preferred options to solving the budget deficit and then submitting those results to the city. The city also conducted polling in May to gauge public sentiment. On June 17th, we held a town hall meeting at the Performing Arts Center. This meeting, which lasted almost 4 hours, was an incredibly productive conversation with the community about the current state of the city's budget, how we got here, and how we might correct course. Coming out of this meeting, the direction we needed to head was pretty clear. So on June 24th, the City Council made several key decisions. A measure to establish a 1-cent sales tax was placed on the upcoming November ballot. A resolution was passed stating the council's intention to spend revenue from the sales tax to prevent cuts to public safety services. It was established that there will be an oversight committee to ensure that funds are spent responsibly and as intended. But seeking much needed revenue was not enough. The council wanted to make sure we were being transparent, that the community clearly understood the choice in front of us. So they passed a resolution directing staff to pursue significant and unavoidable cost-cutting measures should the sales tax fail to pass on the November ballot. And they were specific about what would have to be cut. The cost-cutting plan includes closing one of the city's 3 fire stations, specifically Station 2, located on Yucaipa Boulevard, and eliminating from our contracts with CAL FIRE all firefighter positions currently assigned to that station, saving an estimated $2 million annually. Reducing the cost of our contract with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department by $2 million, primarily through the elimination of 5 to 7 sheriff's deputy positions. Closing the Senior Center, saving an estimated $300,000 annually. Closing the 7th Street Pool, saving an estimated $300,000 annually. Reducing YPAC programming that does not achieve full cost recovery, saving an estimated $250,000 annually. Reducing community center programming that does not achieve full cost recovery, saving an estimated $250,000 annually. Identifying additional cuts to community services programming of $900,000. Identifying cuts of $1 million in net costs of development services. Identifying cuts of $1 million in net costs of support services. Now, these cost-cutting measures are to include the freezing of any vacant, non-critical positions and negotiating any combination of furloughs and/or layoffs with the Yucaipa City Employees Association. I think it's human nature to be skeptical of government, especially when we see so many examples of waste at the state and federal levels. The knee-jerk reaction is to say that government needs to tighten its belt and cut back on spending. But here in Yucaipa, the problem is much more one of insufficient revenue. It's critical that the community understands the choice in front of us. Yes, we can absolutely cut spending, but not without also cutting services to the community. And most of those cuts would have to come from public safety because there is simply not enough meat on the bone anywhere else. So the question before the community is really quite simple, although not easy. Are we willing to pay a little more to keep the services we have now? If not, then okay, but we don't want anyone to be surprised when drastic cuts to services across the board have to be made. Yucaipa is a wonderful town, Our strong commitment to police and fire services makes us one of the safest cities in the region. Our investments in community services such as parks, festivals, and youth and senior programs help to build and maintain a strong sense of community. So the question really is, what kind of community do we want? What do we truly value? Are we willing to dig just a little bit deeper to maintain and protect the quality of life that we've all come to love? So let us pray for wisdom as we contemplate the best path forward. For our community is truly at a crossroads. It will be up to each of us to decide what kind of place we want Yucaipa to be. What version of Yucaipa do we want for ourselves and for our families? Thank you for watching.
All right, thank you for attending tonight. I'm Phil White, the Director of Finance for the City of Yucaipa. I've got, 10 slides or so just to provide some additional context. But the purpose of these, as Joe stated, is to provide an opportunity for Q&A, answer any questions that you may have. We're really trying to provide the information necessary for a good decision in November. And what that good decision is just an educated decision. Whether it's a yes or a no, it's truly just totally understand what that decision is. And so as we go through these, the key is we have costs. The costs of our service levels as provided today are more than the revenues that we have today. And so we have two options. One is to fund those service levels if we like those service levels that are being provided. The other is to cut the service levels back to the existing revenues. And that's ultimately where we are. Some of this information is pretty high level. As we get into it, it might get a little bit dense, but the key takeaway is simply the option. Do we want to cut services to existing revenue levels or fund services? So this chart that you see, and you may have seen this over and over again, but this is equity. And what equity is in a government is it's termed fund balance, but it's the accumulated resources, revenues above expenditures accumulated since the beginning of incorporation for the city. So it's equity. Assets minus liabilities is another way to define it. But going back to 2003, there was a significant change in the financial reporting model in 2003, and that's why I start all of my graphs at 2003. Before that, it's a more difficult apples to apple comparison. So in 2003, we had a $35 million fund balance accumulated citywide. That's not just general fund, that's all financial funds. Sometimes this information is easier if we're not talking about specific buckets of money, general fund and all the individual funds. So on all of my slides, it's everything wrapped up together, not just general fund, not just capital project funds, everything put together. So this is something that you've seen over and over again. To oversimplify, if you see things going up, that would indicate surplus. Things going down, that indicates deficit. Okay, so up means revenues are more than expenses. Down means expenses are more than revenues. That chart can be split into 4 different categories. The first one is it's going up. That means we're in a surplus situation. And so I've termed that period of time the glory days of Yucaipa, going through 2008. And so we're going, that's you may have heard, Yucaipa saves up and pays for infrastructure, pays for capital, and always is flush, always has a surplus. That is absolutely the case, not only general fund, all funds citywide up through 2008. The next period of time is what I've been calling the building period, that 15-ish years. 12 years is we're spending down, citywide spending down. General fund is not spending down, but citywide, we're spending down the citywide equity. And what a significant component of that is a capital spend. We're building things throughout the community. And one of these slides here will kind of list all of the stuff that's been added. But I was recently reminded that over the course of this time frame, it was well over $200 million of capital infrastructure that has been added to the city. So a lot of building going on. Building is expensive, and ultimately we're spending down our equity. This anomaly rectangle, three things happened and you'll recognize that based on the timing, but it was fiscal year 2020 through fiscal year 2023. And what happened was COVID happened, and from a programming standpoint, our community services department retracted the programming. We shrunk, we stopped providing programming, and when we do that, costs go down. We're not providing the services, costs go down. So that was the first thing. The second thing is we got an infusion of money, federal money, ARPA money, to fund COVID. That number's over 8 million, less than 9 million. But we got it's a one-time infusion of cash. And so that helped. We had slightly lower costs. We had ARPA money. And then the third thing is, coincidentally, we also received about $8 million of money from SBCTA for restricted money for specific uses. And so that was a one-time infusion of cash, coupled with ARPA money, coupled with a reduction in community services programming. And that's oversimplified because everything was shrinking at that time, but community services was really hit hard during that anomaly period. With all of those things, we kind of spike back up, and then we get to the projection period. Community services is fully programmed. ARPA money was a one-time thing. We're no longer getting that. And then that other funding was also a one-time thing, no longer getting that. So really, you can look at that trend going back to 2008 down, that arrow, and that's the trend we're in. The reason we're having this conversation is this is a true zero number. Once that arrow hits zero, we have other conversations to have, and we're probably not the ones having those conversations. Other people are coming in and saying, we'll do your job for you. So we want to fix the problem proactively before we get to that zero line. Citywide, this is what our revenues look like. So we have $15 million in property tax. The property tax that the city receives is composed of primarily the 1% general levy on your property tax bill. So on your property tax bill, a lot of different things listed. There's that general levy. The city gets roughly 20%, depending on the tax rate area of your address. But sometimes it's slightly over 20, sometimes it's slightly under, but most of Yucaipa is right around 20%. And so 20% of the 1% general levy equates to $15 million. We also get sales tax citywide. Sales tax is 7.75. 1% of the 7.75 flows back locally to the city. 6% of that amount stays with the state, and 0.75%, 0.75, is routed to the county. So of the 7.75 retail sales tax, the city is getting 1% of that. It equates to $5.5 million. The third bucket of general revenues, unrestricted revenues, is franchise fees and vehicle license fees and other. And so things like the lively conversation that we had a few months ago on the trash hauler franchise fees, that goes into that bucket, VLF, and then everything else is in that bucket. That's roughly $8.5 million. That's all general revenue, unrestricted for use. That far right column is program revenues. Those are restricted for use. They're either grants or charges for services. So if community services, as an example, has an event and they charge for admission, that rolls into a charge for service, and it would flow into that revenue stream. That's, again, this is citywide. I did highlight what the estimated general fund component of that is as well, $10.5 million in the general fund. The other $10 million is external to the general fund. Expenditures, this is where we spend. This is specifically for general fund and public safety fund, so our operating spending. Public safety, police, fire, and paramedic, in fiscal 25, we are anticipating spending $23.5 million. I would like to highlight, if you take anything away from tonight, one thing that you want to take away is $23.5 million. If you took all of our property tax, $15 million, and all of our sales tax, $5.5, we would still have a $3 million deficit if we took every penny and paid for public safety. We still need to come up with $3 million more to pay for public safety. Public safety does not have a offsetting revenue stream. We commit some of our property tax already, but in reality, we're spending all of our property tax, all of our sales tax, plus $3 million on funding public safety. Community services has $7.7 million in fiscal 25 of spending. Public works, which includes community development, code enforcement, planning, engineering, and public works, has a $9 million estimated spending. And then general government, or what I've been calling support services, which includes the city council department, city manager department, finance, human resources, general services, information technology, and governmental affairs, is $6.3 million. Those are all numbers, but what I did want to do is dig a little bit deeper into those, and I created spending layers over that 22-year period from 2003 up through 24. And what this set of slides does is identifies increases or decreases in service levels over 22 years. So starting in 2003, and this is specifically for community services, our first spending layer, 2003, our spending for community services was $835,000. If you bought anything in 2003 and you bought it today, the price is different. So if we adjusted that $835,000 for inflation, that equates to $1.4 million. What we are planning to spend in community services this year is $7.7 million. So what that tells me is we've ramped up services up to $7.7 million. Our inflation adjusted number would have been 1.4. So I don't know, that's what, six times more community services than we did in 2003, 22 years ago. And we'll go through each of the four functions with that same analysis. So this is development services. Again, it's not just development services, it's everything including public works. But in 2003, we spent $2.4 million. Inflation adjusted is $4.1 million. 2025, we're planning to spend $9 million. Again, we have an increase in service levels related to development services. Engineering is also included in this, and so you see that thick ribbon throughout time. Lot of development services spending always. But it's not just a flat, it kind of ebbs and flows because engineering, planning, all of those things are included in this, and those, as projects come and go, there's an ebb and flow, but inflation adjusted 4 million and we're spending 9 indicates an increase in service levels. Public safety, that's a nice flat line increasing over time. This one was crazy to me when I put this slide together, but in 2003, we have $4.9 million, remember that number for the next slide, but $4.9 million in public safety spending. Inflation adjusted, that number is 8.4 million. What we're actually spending this year is 23.5 million, which means about 3 times service levels on the public safety side. Nice flat, this is because we contract for fire and police, and those increases are flat, consistent, and that's why there's no ebb and flow. That's an interesting line. Each one of these lines is $10 million, by the way, and so you can see we busted through the 10 million and the 20, and we're up to 23.5. This one is capital. Capital it's a one-time, so it goes up and down depending on the project. I didn't even put an inflation adjustment factor because it's sporadic. But that's kind of what our capital spend looks like over 22 years. What I did provide, what Fermin Preciado provided, was a history from 03 to 23 capital improvement program project funding sources for Yucaipa. So you can see I just copied and pasted his email. Hopefully I didn't copy and paste too much, but all of the projects that the city successfully implemented and paid for over the course of time, but that all equates to $211 million. He did point out that there's a component of the YPAC that's not included in that, about $15 million. So we're at $225 million of infrastructure and facility improvement in the city over the last 20 years. If you're improving something over $250 million over the course of time, you would think that the support necessary to provide that would also increase commensurate with that. Our last spending layer is general government or support services. In 2003, we spent $5 million, and these are all based on audited financial statements that are available. But we spent $5 million in 2003. If you remember a couple slides ago, public safety was 4.9 million. We actually spent more in 2003 on general government than we did for public safety, which was mind-blowing to me, but we did it. So $5 million in 2003. Inflation adjusted, that's $8.6 million. What we're actually spending this year is $6.3 million. So we are, based on what we spent in '03 to support what we had going on, we added $250 million of stuff, and to support that, we're spending 26% less than we did back then, which shows, you might have heard that Yucaipa is lean and continues to be lean. It's all true. You can see this ribbon is really lean all the way through here, and yes, it gets thicker over here probably since that was COVID and all functions were hit with COVID, but coming out of COVID, we're increasing. But to put that into context, over 2 decades, more than 2 decades, we're spending less, 26% less, significantly less now to support something that's $250 million bigger than it was back then. That was crazy. All right, so to build this back, that's a revenue line. This is all revenues, unrestricted and restricted grants, everything. That's our community services layer. This is our development services layer. That's our public safety layer. That's our capital layer. Every time that mountain peaks over that black line, that would indicate deficit, a time of deficit where our equity is going to go down. So to overlay that with, and this is just the outline of the previous, that blue chart, that mountain, you can see every time that the mountain goes past the black line, we're coming down. But this is our spending layers as we go through time. I know this information is dense, but it provides, from the consideration of how did we get here, this provides excellent information of, hey, this isn't something that just popped up. This is something that's been happening for a long time, and there was no error made here or here or here or here. It's just over the course of 22 years, things happen, and decisions that are great 22 years ago may not be so great there. And so we're having a discussion to say, hey, for the next 22 years, we need to make a different decision now. All right, so to get less dense, this is just a quick highlight of our budget lifespan. Budgets are a terrible indicator of financial information, or maybe better put, it's one of many indicators. And so you can't just look at the budget and say, hey, you have a budget deficit, you must be financially unhealthy. There's a lot more context that goes into it. So we plan, the budget is a 1-year spending plan. Council says this is how we want you to attack the spending plan this year. They do that in April, May. They adopt a budget, the city manager's budget they adopt in June based on their directives. And then what staff does is execute. So we're in the middle of executing the fiscal year spending plan, which has that $7.3 million deficit. When we get to 26, we plan to have a balanced budget. How we balance that budget depends on what the community wants to do moving forward. When we started, we got to a $7.3 million. When we started the process, we were over $15 million. And so before we brought something to council, we were cutting different things. This is just a list of all the things that were, a partial list of the things that were cut from that process. But it's important to realize that the budget is, what's in the budget is important. What's outside of the budget is also important to know. And all those things are not included in the $7 million deficit. They were cut out. Ultimately, we've got, as a community, we have an option to, a choice to make. If we decide to fix this on the cut side, we can say we can't get there without these things. And those are all the things that Chris highlighted in that video. So public safety cuts and a lot of the community services cuts. Those are things that we can't balance without those. So we know it's not a scare tactic, it's just we know those things have to go, and we'll figure out the rest later. There's a lot of the to be determined that we're gonna figure it out. But big picture, if we fix this on the cut side, everything on that list is we're starting with that, and then there's going to be more, and we just have to figure out what the more is. Painful cuts. Revenue increases are also painful because revenue increases in a municipality typically mean taxes. And so that's also a painful proposition, but that's where we are as a community. Measure S is what we're talking about tonight. But just so you know, there's a lot of different things that we're doing at City Hall. Measure S is one component of the fix, the biggest component, but there's also things, we're fixing this, we're not putting this all on Measure S. We're tightening up operations as we go through to make sure that we're headed in a new path. As we go through these, there's a lot of frequently asked questions, so we'll have a Q&A, but I did want to kind of kick that off with some of the things that have come up. One of them Joe touched on, is this meant to be a scare tactic? No, absolutely not. It's exactly the opposite. It's an informational, we've got a choice. People that I really like and appreciate their perspective land on different sides. They say, yep, totally understand it. It means service cuts, and that's what we're choosing for these reasons. Other people say, sir, I don't like the idea of service level cuts. I'm willing to say yes to fund those. Both of them are fine. What I get a kick out of is taking the emotion out of it and saying, I understand the concept. It's a non-emotional choice, and this is the choice I'm making. I feel personally satisfied with that result, whatever it may be. From a timing perspective, why didn't I know about this until now? I would say that there's a lot of reasons, but ultimately, the city did highlight, going back to 2020, they highlighted the fact that our paramedic program had a deficit, and there was a measure on the ballot in 2020 that said, hey, we've got a problem, we've got a program that is in a deficit position, and we can no longer provide that. So they put a measure on the ballot to fix that. The measure failed. There was no changes in that programming. It was also right around that timing that we got that COVID infusion. We got the San Bernardino County money. We were cutting services. And so it was kind of hidden with all of that. And so it probably provided an opportunity not to cut services because COVID bailed us out, which you think of COVID as a totally bad thing. But in this instance, for the city of Yucaipa municipal finance, it ultimately bought the city time because of all of those things. But there were flags. My point is there were flags, not just now, all along the way to say, hey, we got problems coming up here and there. How do we know this won't happen again? One of the things that we're doing in the finance department is really trying to do a better job of forecasting and long-range financial planning. As we go through that, we're saying, all right, we want to peg, ultimately, wherever the community wants to go, we want to peg cost increases with revenue increases. And so if revenues are only increasing 3%, we're going to find a way to hold costs at 3%. There's a lot of different moving parts in the costs, but we're trying to get to that plan and work with city council to say, okay, what's our strategy for attacking this long term? We're working on that behind the scenes. If bankruptcy isn't imminent, why are we even talking about this? It's not a bad thing to talk about this. I look at this as we're being really proactive. We're not bankrupt. All our checks based on our budget, our adopted budget, every one of those checks is going to clear. And so we have the opportunity to kick that can, and we asked council to do that, and they agreed to that with the adoption of that plan. We're talking about it now so that we don't become bankrupt. We have to change, and either side of that change is painful. And so we're working with the community to say, what do we want Yucaipa to look like? And then ultimately, cost-cutting measures. One is that I've been getting a lot is the city open for suggestions. Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying that I'm the smartest guy in the room and I have it figured out. Absolutely not. I am open for suggestions, and I'm trying to provide more and more detail as we go through these meetings based on the suggestions and the questions that come up. So yes is the answer to that one. And then the last one, can we cut employee salaries? Joe made a joke earlier. Yeah, we can. There's a lot of different ways that we can do that. Ultimately, if you saw that ribbon for general government, historically, all service levels, every single one except for support, has a higher service level than it did 22 years ago. Support services, which typically when people say salary cuts, it's the salaries within support, because we also have salaries in each one of the service lines. But if we were to say we're going to fix the budget deficit based on cuts of salaries within support, it doesn't fix it. It's a tiny drop in the bucket, and we've done that for a long period of time. We're 26% less support than we were 22 years ago. So all of those things are what are frequently asked. I also put in on our website, there is the Safe and Secure link, which has budget information, measure information, all kinds of information that's on our city website. I didn't pay for the royalties of this, but this is a local photographer. That is Yucaipa, and he is an award-winning artist, mostly of the Sierras, but he lives in town. He's opening up a shop. I didn't pay him royalties, but instead I'll give him a plug. He's opening a shop on Yucaipa Boulevard in the Uptown. So that's his picture. I didn't pay him for it. We bought him in 2018. And with that, there is a microphone, or I can just repeat the question. Oh, I'm sorry. Josh Endres. Josh Endres Studios is opening next to Tipsy Taco. So pay him a visit at the Autumn Fest. Megan got a plug too. I'd be happy if you want to.
So Phil, we're recording this, so if you want to come and put your question into the microphone, that way we can have it recorded well. First up is Hanson Wong.
This is not made for short people. It's made for Mr. White. So you said questions. Does that mean I can't make comments? I can phrase everything in questions if you want.
Yes. Just.
Okay. So why is it that the city does not put enough information in front of the city council over the last year and a half that we've had these structural deficits, not to enhance projects that make the structural deficits worse, like increased housing when there isn't any general plan or bonus densities that would allow it, and some as much as 25, 50% more than it should be, and every single additional person would create additional structural defect. Keep going with the questions?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Was that your question?
Well, that was one of my questions. How many questions do I get?
Well,
Three?
I'll respond to that one first.
I'm sorry?
I can respond to that one if you're ready for me to.
Fine.
Okay, so what I would say is, for the sake of this discussion, we have an existing problem based on current services. Once we solve that item, we have the additional responsibility to continue in a sustainable way, and that's future projects and the sustainability of the fiscal situation in the city. And so, while we're not, I guess the question is, what was the question?
That we don't persuade the city council or the other committees not to do projects that would make our structural deficit worse now, because every cent, every nickel, every dollar makes it worse.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, to oversimplify, municipalities, local government, it moves slow. And those projects take a long time. They cross several years. Budget deficits are 1 year budget deficits, operating deficits for 1 year. The types of planning that you're talking about are more comprehensive than single year. The focus and the strategy, pushing that down to the committee level through the planning commission, things like that, that directive is beyond the scope of this. But to be financially healthy, sustainable into the future, those are things that need to be incorporated. They're not incorporated now, but I don't think it's an answer to your question, but
Yeah, because if we have a problem now and we need to increase the tax, or we need to put it in taxes now, then we should start saving the dollars and cents as well. Next question is, we're losing $500,000 a year on the YPAC. Are we going to have a one-year plan that will either come to being break even, or are we going to just continue losing $500,000 a year and using the tax to pay for that?
Yeah, there's context with all of this stuff. The YPAC was built in a way that was never intended to turn a buck. It was built as a community benefit, and the understanding as we went through the process and the way it was constructed makes it extremely difficult for it to be financially viable. That's not to say that it's not a valuable amenity to the community. And when it was put together, the idea from that council was a community benefit, a space that we could do that. Since we're in a deficit situation, there is an ongoing discussion to say, what is the cost benefit of that community benefit? Are we going to continue to program it? I will tell you that there is roughly $500,000 of a net cost in the programming in the fiscal year 25 budget. Fiscal year 26 budget, I don't know what the programming is, but that's a discussion for city council to decide is what service levels do we want? And so based on this year, yeah, 500,000 this year, that's in there. It's part of the problem. As a community, what do we want? If we want to say, fix it on the cut side, YPAC, just like everything else, is going to be on the chopping block. But it was built knowing that there was going to be an operating deficit for the community.
And a lot of things are community service, and you don't have to answer this, but the YPAC is community service. I think it's a good thing in flush years, not a flush year now. And if we're saying, okay, you're going to lose your fire station, you're going to lose your policeman, you're going to lose your community center, and yet, the YPAC isn't in the top three, even though it's $500,000. And I'll give other people a chance, but I have one last question. The water basin. Have you done a financial analysis on the cost benefit of continuing with the water basin project and the revenue that you will accumulate after it's completed? Because we keep throwing millions towards it, and we have a benefit already, which is the La Quinta. But some of the other things that I see on the water basin project is housing. Housing that requires more infrastructure. More infrastructure causes a greater structural deficit. So I think every little thing we need to look at, we need to do a cost analysis, and we need to do a cost benefit. And if we don't do it and we don't present it to the city council, I feel that we're not giving them the whole story. Thank you.
Yeah. Phil, if I may add two things to those comments. Regarding YPAC, I know that the community services team is working towards full cost recovery. And, that's something that Megan can speak to, but they're doing better on that. And then in terms of financing for every rooftop, like you said, is a net negative in the future, but the council did approve a policy that would wrap in municipal services like public safety to help make, like Chris said in the video, make development pay for itself in the future.
Again, I know we're going the right direction with the YPAC. I'm just saying you haven't created a timeline where you say, we're going to reach that crossover point on your budget that's going to require either doing something different or putting a hold on it until we do some corrections. Yeah. It's not saying that they're not doing the things they need to do. We have people on our staff that work hard at trying to do it, but you're taking away to create an entertainment function, which is a good thing in flush times. You're creating something that takes them away from other community services. Just something to consider.
Colleen Wong?
Dr. Wong, what was your last question? I'm sorry.
Water basin.
Oh, water basin. Okay, yes. The one thing that I did want to add with that is that Wilson 3 is, once it's completed, will be deeded over to San Bernardino County Flood Control. It won't be the city property. So really what we're trying to do is complete it so that they'll take it on. At this point, for lack of a better term, the city's pot committed. It's been a long-standing project. We've got tens of $1 million into it, and so we were trying to, before another Hillary happens, get that thing wrapped up, completed, and sent over to flood control. So.
And we're thinking of endpoints, which is good, but you have to figure what it's costing you in the future.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, we have a structural deficit that's coming, and you are trying to sell the community on a tax. And staff is supposed to be neutral on this, are they not?
Yes.
Then why is it that we have staff going around with their video threatening the community with very threatening language, antagonizing people? Do you think that's helpful?
So what staff and video are you talking about?
The one Chris Mann has been
So again, it's not antagonistic.
showing around. It's very threatening to the community, and
So what I would,
someone sent it to me, and I found it equally. The one that we just showed? Yeah, that one.
so the purpose of that
How
is,
is that helpful?
so the reason why it's helpful is because it provides an overview, and what it's meant to do is.
Is there not a better way to do that
I-
than just to be so outright threatening? Is there not a better way to do that? Surely.
Let me take this a different route. As a staff person, I get the lead from council, who appoints the city manager. The city manager, this council says, this is the direction we're going. City manager says, this is how we're gonna get there. As a staff person, I direct my department to do so. As a finance person, I can tell you the numbers in fiscal 25 budget are good numbers, the best the city's ever had. Those are excellent numbers. If you want to see how we got here, I can put together trend charts and say, okay, this is big picture, this is how we got here. But I'm not doing that in a threatening way. I'm doing that for
And I don't find you threatening.
perfect. A lot of people tell me that. I don't find you threatening. I mean, come on, I'm kind of scary. But ultimately,
Giving me facts doesn't threaten me.
so, and that's the purpose of tonight. That's the purpose of all the meetings that we've gone to. But the elephant in the room every time is, hey, why are we being threatened? And I'm saying, nope, we're not. We've got a choice. And as a
Giving me
community,
facts isn't threatening.
yeah, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
That's not the least bit threatening.
Good. Yep.
On the other hand, the video is threatening, and it's not helpful. It's not selling anything.
Oh, that was the other point I wanted to make. I had one job in my life where I was a salesman, and I was fired quickly because I'm a terrible salesman. I'm really bad at it. And so this whole I'm not selling anything. I'm really not. I have an opinion as a resident of Yucaipa, of the North Bench. I have an opinion on this.
I didn't
But-
say you were saying anything.
But I'm not.
I said that video, on the other hand, is really threatening, and it's not helpful in the community if you want to pass this thing.
So
Surely you guys have got to figure out a way to do better,
so
because that thing doesn't help.
I would say that I'm not allowed to, and I am not advocating passing or not. What I'm doing is providing the information to say, community, what do we want? And we're having forums like this so that people can say, what about this? What about that? I think you should think about that. And so we're taking all of that information so that the community can ultimately make the decision.
Well,
As
maybe
far as
you ought to redo
personalities,
the video, is my suggestion.
thank you.
Chuck Wood, and then Joe Sutt.
Chuck Wood, District 5. I didn't find the video threatening at all. I thought it was very informational. I know a lot of people are more sensitive to information that's not really pleasing to look at. So I didn't think that it was threatening at all. It was very informational, and it was a good thing. So the $70 million surplus that we had in, was it 03?
35 in 03, it got to 70 in 08.
Oh, 08, okay. So we've spent all of that and some. And we have a mandate that we have to build out to 80,000 homes, or 80,000 population, excuse me.
Yeah.
So how are we going to sustain city services, safety, all of that stuff, everything that entails with city, once we get to that 80,000, if the city continues overspending? My main concern is that, is there something that is legally binding for this city council and future councils to stay within budget so that we don't get in this mess again?
Yeah.
As much as I hate taxes, I would be willing to go for this 1% tax as long as it was not going to happen again. And how is that going to happen where we don't get in this mess again and again and again? And Chris Mann was saying that state government and federal government are a little bit different than city government. That may be true in some regards, but in the regard of public trust, it's not. And the city government, prior city governments, have put us in a distrustful mood, the entire community. So you can understand our distrust for the present council. What are we getting for assurances that this won't happen again? And it's just this never-ending cycle of government wanting more money.
Yeah.
And not living within the city's means. That's the bottom line. It doesn't matter what you cut or how much you tax or anything. Cities, government, they always want more. And as citizens, I think we're tired of giving them more and more and more. Live within our budget, and we're pretty happy. That's the bottom line. So following from this point forward, what assurances can this city council, this city government give us in perpetuity that this won't happen again? That's my main question.
Okay.
Because I don't want it to happen again.
Yeah, I won't fake like I have that I represent city council. So I won't dodge the question, but I will fill in. I think I have four, starting with what assurances can council provide. I can tell you from a staffing standpoint, what we're doing is we're looking at this as November's an important day in the finance department, because that's going to give us an indication of what the community wants in a direction. I alluded to a long-range financial plan. What we're trying to do is say, in order not to get here again, we need a long-range financial plan that council can look at and make decisions on based on projection. And so the one of the key components of that is to say operating costs cannot exceed revenues. All kinds of problems happen with that. And so the long-range financial plan would document the process to say, how are we going to peg cost increases to limit them to whatever revenues are at that point in time. So we would be unable to present council a budget with an operating deficit in it. We don't want to do that. As far as what's legally binding, council can use accumulated reserves in a budget. Like right now, we're using $7.3 million of accumulated reserves. And the reason that council can do that is because we have the money in the bank to do that. We can do that while we're figuring out how we move forward. Council cannot, if we had no money in the bank, they cannot have a unbalanced budget. It's illegal for them to do that. And so that is already in place where we can have a 1-year deficit because we've got money in the bank. Once we hit zero, they can't.
What happens then when we hit zero? What legally happens?
Well, what happens is all of the courts get involved at that point, and we have some surrounding areas that have gone through this already, but they say, okay, based on your current bills, this is what you're gonna pay, this is what you're not gonna pay, these are what we'll agree that you can release funds for, but another group comes in, takes over, and says, this is how you're going to operate as a city now. All of the things like community services, done, gone.
So we'll
off the
be
top.
basically governed by, what is it, the state government? The state will come in and dictate?
Yeah, I would think that, I'm not exactly sure. I can find out for you, but it would not be me as your director of finance. Other people would come in. I'd probably be gone before that, but other people would come in and say, we're making these decisions for you. We don't care what the community thinks on service levels. You're going to the bare minimum, and that would be across the board cuts, existing obligations. Some of them would be paid, some of them wouldn't be. But in a bankruptcy situation, it's up to the courts to decide who gets paid past, and then operationally going forward, it's bare bones. So it's not a good situation. We want to avoid that situation. I'm not saying that's going to happen. We're going to, as a community, we're going to make a good decision and move forward. But ultimately, worst case scenario, San Bernardino's been through it. Other places have been through it. It's no good. You mentioned if the city continues overspending, meetings like this are to ensure that city council understands what the community wants, and so that we don't continue overspending. I would say that term overspending to me means imbalanced budgets. And again, next budget, I anticipate that's going to be a balanced budget one way or another. We're going to hear the voice of the community on what they want, and it's going to be balanced. And so by the time we get there, we won't. And how we move forward with that, really, it comes down to long-range financial planning. I feel bad saying that because that comes from the finance department, and that's not in place yet. And really, right now, we're saying we could go one of two ways based on where we go. Now we're going to plug that into a long-range plan and start building from there. Was there one other? I wrote down sales tax, but I don't remember the question with the sales tax.
I didn't have a question with sales tax.
Okay. The other one would be living within our means. You mentioned that one. Yes, living within our means is absolutely the case. It got away from us, as you can see. As I look through the surrounding community and as we have these discussions, people say, how about this community? How about that community? But within our community, on a revenue side, the one that's most like us is the city of Highland. The city of Highland, their service lines are significantly different than the city of Yucaipa service lines. The city of Highland's infrastructure, the city of Highland hasn't spent $225 million on infrastructure types things over the last 20 years. They pay for their public safety. They have some core services, but they contracted with the YMCA for community services. So their spending is totally different than us, even though their revenues are very similar to us. And
So has anybody looked at following their model?
I would say that it would be difficult for Yucaipa to follow their model because we've built all this stuff.
Okay, so then you really can't compare the two.
So it's a difficult one, but on the revenue side,
I understand there's a lot of minutia that holds this all together that I don't understand.
yeah. And so to undo, we could do that, but what that would mean is to cut services and the things that we've built over the course of time. And so it would be, it's not clean. It's not a clean we can't, we built the YPAC. Are we going to shutter the doors of the YPAC? I don't, but all the infrastructure, that whole list of the infrastructure things, it's difficult to say, but on the revenue side, our revenue streams are very close to Highland. It's just Highland doesn't provide the services. And so you don't hear them saying, hey, we've got a budgetary deficit, because they're living within their means, right? And so if we were to do that, we can do our best to model Highland to do that. And we'd get there, but geographically and the makeup of Yucaipa is significantly different. On the flip side, other communities around us have more similar service lines. Even like a Beaumont has a significantly different type of community services, where they don't spend a lot on community services, but their revenue streams, especially sales tax revenue streams, are 6 times the size of Yucaipa's. And so those residents are getting less service, and there's a lot more city funding involved. And so I look at this as kind of right sizing to say, hey, we need the community's help to say all of these service levels that Yucaipa has that people really like, we can't pay for them. And so do we want to pay for them, or do we want to cut them? And it's a tough decision.
See, that's the whole problem on the distrust, is because the previous city councils spent all of this money, and now we're ending up paying for this in forever.
Thank you.
And we don't have the money to do it. So we have, as the way I understand it, we have 2 choices: cut, or tax.
Yeah.
And
So
because we already have these services, they're here. You're not going to bulldoze the YPAC. You're not going to bulldoze the community center.
Right.
They're here, and we're going to have to pay for them. They're already, it's already in the budget.
yeah. So how do we bridge that gap? It's the list of things that
it's hard.
that were there, and it's hard. But one thing that I did want to clarify is you said we had $70 million, all of that, and then some has been spent. We didn't. We spent a lot of money, but we still have revenues coming in, and so we're down to whatever was on the far right side of that graph. But we have $30-40 million still, and so we spent a lot, but we have revenues coming in, and so I don't want to say that people, all the money's gone and we're here cleaning up the mess. No, Yucaipa has had some incredible projects over the course of time. Those projects cost, and when you wrap it all together, we're not as good as it turns out the community thought we were financially, but at the same time, we're not broke. We're being proactive in how do we want to fix this as a community, and we have options on how we progress. And so it's not, City Hall's not getting boarded up, we're not going bankrupt. We're being proactive to say, community, help us on a proactive basis. How do we move forward? So I did want to clarify that also.
All right, I'm kind of done with questions, but I'd like to just say something. I have a vote of confidence for this city council and the direction, and the city staff, everybody. I think you're headed in the right direction. I would ask you to forgive my tone, because I get upset at all of this being broke stuff. And I blame city council, the previous one, excuse me, for getting us in this mess. I think that what you guys are doing is in the right direction. There's no easy way out. I just, the one last thing I'd like to say is that I'd really like to see this, I don't know how to say it, this city council changes. So what's going to prevent future city councils from getting us in this mess again? Is the bottom line. There's got to be some structure that prevents any future city council from doing this to us citizens.
Yeah, I have my own personal opinion.
Well,
I'll tell
go
you,
ahead.
big picture, what communities do to say we're not going to change based on each council, we're going to have a direction as a community, is what's termed a strategic plan. And the council says, as a community, this is a strategy of what our community is going to look like.
because your long-range financial program
Yeah. That plugs
is
into
good
this.
for now.
Yeah,
but-
the long-range financial plan is one component of a strategic plan, and it plugs into it. And so other communities have a documented strategy to say, we've answered these questions already. This is how we're going to progress. And a new council member comes in, one leaves, they go back to the strategy plan, that document, to say, do we still have a good strategy moving forward?
Is that document binding, legally binding?
No, council.
That's the problem,
Council can
see?
change it,
Yeah.
but it's something to say, hey, as a community, we've tackled this problem, and this is where we want to go as a community.
So the only recourse that the community would have if a future council goes in the wrong direction is to vote somebody else in.
Yeah, and that's.
It'd be nice to not have to worry about voting somebody else in if the financial situation is going the wrong way. And I'll leave with that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Joe Sett, followed by Melanie Martindale.
Hi, I want to preface my question with a little statement. I have to tell you that I come to these meetings to try to learn what's going on. This is all very foreign to me. I don't even speak this language. And although I thought the video was good, it's the third time I've watched it, and I hear wah, 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 wah. It's like being in my math classes in high school. I don't do math. This is all math. It's a language I don't understand. And in that case, when there's something I don't understand, I have to have an advisor that I can trust,
Yes.
that will steer me in the right direction. And that's where my concern is here. If I would have to have somebody I really trust, and the trust is broken with the city to a great degree. I know you guys are trying to build it. I'm wishing for that. I'm trying to seek that, but I haven't found it completely yet. And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you at the meeting on Saturday, and I hope you have an answer. When I want to know about the oversight committee, because I don't understand this. I want somebody who's watching over what's going on. Is there an oversight committee established yet? Will there be an oversight committee established? What will the criteria be for selecting those members to be on that committee? And are they city employees? I really want to know who's really watching the hen house, because I don't get it. I don't get it. As much as I've been here, it would take me years to understand this.
Yeah.
I don't, and I'm really disappointed we're not seeing more people, but I imagine there are a lot of them that are going through the same thing I'm going through. How many times can I hear this formula and it still is Greek to me? Help me out here.
Two things. One is the oversight committee is specific to the measure, and so that wouldn't be all the stuff. That would be out of the purview of the oversight committee. The oversight committee would be established to monitor the spending of the funds accumulated through the measure. So that sales tax measure, those proceeds, the spending of those would be governed by that oversight committee. Joe, do you want to field a question on the compilation of the oversight committee? Perfect. So if the measure were to pass, an oversight committee would be established. It has not been established yet. The compilation of it, I do not know if it's defined in the language of the measure, but there will be one. And I don't know if it would specifically exclude or include staff. I would think that staff, like somebody in the finance department or something, would be included in that oversight committee, but I'm also sure that there would be community representation on the oversight committee as well. But it's specific to governing the proceeds of the measure.
Well, and how about having an ongoing oversight committee to watch all the goings on until we have some trust?
That's the community. That's the community.
I know, but we need to be watching all the time. And if I don't understand, I can't observe and make sense of it.
Yeah.
I need people that I know will know what they're talking about, and that I know have the best interest of the community in mind.
Yeah.
I wish somebody would come up with a solution for that.
Yeah, I will tell you that I have met with members of the community several times to ask specific questions. This stuff is dense. There's a lot of different moving parts. As far as building the trust, sure, I would love for people to say, yeah, I saw what you said and I trust that, Phil. I would like that. I also understand that that is the first thought when I say something is, yeah, I don't believe you. And so I understand that, but what I try to, everything that all the information that I'm giving, I also want to say, this is all based on audited financial statements, information that's published. I'm just accumulating it and trying to make it a little more digestible. And I'm happy to walk through with anybody at any time to say, where did you get that? Where did you get that? Because everybody's mind works differently and everything clicks differently for everybody. So, but that's part of the building the trust is I can give you the information. I can point to where this is where it's been published. But the trust thing is not an overnight thing.
It sure is not, and I think it's the most vital part. Yeah. You know, it's the most vital part of this whole issue is having trust in our administrators.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Yep. Also, this stuff is boring, but Ryan Miller, if you know him, he's a very exciting guy. Oh.
And also, too, it's good to mention that it's a yearly outside audit on that as well.
Did you want to?
I mean, sure. There is some definition. You can find it, Measure S, on the website, and it's directly from the documents. And it talks about the committee who will be the residents of the city. And it looks like 5 members of the city. And the committee shall repost, and let's see. Yeah, so it's basically the establishment of 5 community members that will guide the proceeds of that 1% tax. And in addition to, in the measure, which was right there, section 3.18.050. It's an independent annual audit as well. So that committee and also any of those proceeds from that tax will have an audit every year too.
And I hope they don't pick somebody like me to be on that committee. It better be somebody who knows what they're doing.
If anybody listens to this meeting, you will be excluded from the pool, I'm sure.
Melanie Martindale, District 4. So I have a myriad of things. One is I want to start out with the solutions that I was kind of thinking of. One is rent out the senior center to a small church for evening and weekend use. I don't know how that would work as far as financial. Agreement with the district to use 7th Street Park Pool for their schools so they can use it for PE, especially like since the middle schools are right, or the 9th grade campus is right there.
Use 7th Street Park.
Pool.
Pool.
Mm-hmm. So, and especially because it gets hotter here most of the year, that would be, I think, something kind of fun for the kids to do. I know my dad remembers walking from that place when it was the not 9th grade campus, I think it was junior high, and they used to walk down and use the pool for PE. So that might be a good agreement financially.
That's why I was confused, because it's the plunge. If your dad was at Yucaipa Intermediate, it's the plunge, not the pool. So
my dad's old, but I love him. The other thing was allowing warehouses in large stores. If you look at Highland, Redlands, Hemet, Beaumont, etc., they have all done such. They have all been able to manage this financially. I know a lot of people don't like it, but we kind of need to stop putting the cart before the horse and start thinking about 20 years down the road, 40 years down the road. Financially, are we going to be drowning while everyone else around us is taking our money? Yeah. The other last one was charging for events. When we do the Easter egg hunt, when we do the Christmas tree lighting, when we do events like that, maybe charging for them, and that money going into the general fund or specifically earmarked for public safety. So that way the public is kind of helping support that. So that might be an idea. My question is, if we reduce officers, how will that impact our current homeless population? Because we've been working really, really hard to keep that down. and we've been working really hard to connect them to the right resources, get them help where they need it. So by removing the 5 officers, I believe that's what it said, how would that impact that? My other question is, can we make the 1% tax to be capped, so it's just at 1%, or where we can in the future earmark it where it only goes to public safety budget? It doesn't go into the general fund anymore, because that's why the last measure failed, because it went into the general fund and we didn't trust the government to actually allocate for our services. So that's why it failed. I know that's why I didn't vote for it. And then my other question is for the Wilson 3, you said it's going to be county property. Is the county helping us fund that? Because if they're going to take over, shouldn't they help with the building of such a property if they're going to benefit from it?
Okay.
And then my last thing is I agree with Ms. Jo on the committee. I know we have 5 members, as it says in the little fine print, but it should be 1 member of each district at least, because in that way all districts are represented. It should be people who are able to meet. We schedule it when they can meet. We probably should at least have 1 or 2 city staff members that specifically deal with the budget. So in that way, with the oversight, we have people who have knowledge of the ins and outs of the budget, but then we have a representative from each district who can, basically represent those viewpoints. I think that would be a good idea. And I also agree with her. It's kind of sad because I see on Facebook all the time a bunch of chatter. Everyone's complaining. We have 15 people here. 15, I counted them. And it's the same 15 that always show up. So if people want to, trying to say how to say this nicely. If people want to have a say in their government, they need to start showing up to these meetings.
Are there more than 15 comments on Facebook?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Okay, let me hit these one by one before you.
Yeah.
So the rental of facilities, yes, Megan
She had to leave.
has I mentioned we're doing some things in-house. So that's one of them is the rental of facilities that the one that pops into mind is the baseball fields. And so we were working with one of the little leagues that we felt like there was maybe some extra time available on those fields. So we were working with them to tighten up, take the fields when you want them, but let us know when you're not going to use them, so we can rent those facilities, because those are assets for the community that can generate revenues to offset some of the costs that we have. So we are doing those things in-house. I can extend the concept to like the senior center that you mentioned, the pool. I know that she's doing that also, but the idea of coordinating with the school district, we have a lot of partnerships with the school district. I'm not sure if there is one on the aquatic side with the pool, but that's an interesting one. Other communities, pools are not financially viable. They're a community benefit, so they never pencil. But it's good to have the plunge in town, and I don't think your dad's that old, by the way. But
He'll love you for that.
but those things are good. But communities do, when everything gets squeezed, communities have made a decision, which is they don't pencil. So and so that's a tough thing. In Yucaipa, the one other unique thing is a few years ago the pool was added up at Crafton Hills, and there's some joint use with the pool at Crafton in town too. So we have 2 pools that we are financially committing to, and so that's part of the whole thing. But the public benefit side of those types of things are important to the community, and that's one of the things that Chris mentioned because that's one of the things that's they don't pencil, and they're never going to pencil, but they're just good services. And it's just like, man, if we have to cut these things that don't pencil, we've got to cut them, but there's the community benefit side. So that's a tough balance for sure. The charging for events, there's some events that we are charging for, the like Autumn Fest, those types of events we haven't, but for 4th of July, we did. And so we're picking and choosing, but the purpose of community services in general from a municipality is not to make a buck. It's to provide community benefit. And so that's an ongoing balance. We're having those discussions, but man, it's like, I want to go to Autumn Fest. I don't want to have to reach into my pocket to walk into Autumn Fest. And so
That's what I was kind of thinking. If we do it, like, even though we do it as a temporary measure, we're like, hey, we all got to pull together.
Yeah.
It's not us versus them. It's not you versus me. It's we're trying to get past this deficit, get us back to surplus, so then it doesn't happen again. So what can we do as a community to help? And so that's what I was thinking. If we charge for those events as a temporary basis, if you think of how many people come to that, if we only do like maybe $5 a ticket,
yeah.
that alone would help us a lot.
Philip, can I add a little context to that?
No.
You have to come to the mic.
I had sat down with Megan a few months ago, and you have a great point. So we looked at the services of the free events that we do offer, and there is a very, very fine line when you start instantly charging for everything, your attendance drops.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where you have to be careful. So we've looked at in the services where we do offer free, what if we provide like some low cost amenities, like a VIP thing to hopefully help offset cost and sell a little section. So we're experimenting with things like that, but it is an inching progress towards having everything be an admission fee.
Yeah.
Because attendance will drop down, Facebook comments go up. So it's a fine line. You got to ease your way into it.
It's
the way I have an
the
answer.
slow and steady wins the race kind of deal.
Let's see, you mentioned the SOP team and the impact of reducing officers. Captain Walker that question was posed to him this morning at the ministerial group's breakfast. And what he said was, and I'm gonna, he's here. Do you wanna field that one? Another pleasure. Yep.
Man, my questions are just pulling everyone to the mic.
So if I heard or understood your question, it was, how would these cuts, if the measure didn't pass, how would that affect our efforts to tackle the unhoused issue in town? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, because
So-
you guys have been doing an awesome job, so.
Thank you. So when you look at our staffing, our current contract with the city right now, we have 28 deputy sheriffs on the contract. 2 of those are dedicated school resource officers that we work with the district with. So that's 26 people. So our approach historically, and we're always evaluating it to make sure we're deploying our resources the best way we can to meet the city and the council's objectives and their highest priorities, the unhoused being one of those priorities. But at our core, to oversimplify, to steal Phil's term from earlier, is our ability to be there when somebody needs us the most, right? When somebody makes that 911 call, they call sheriff's dispatch, having a deputy sheriff available to respond to that call. So we try to determine what a minimum staffing level would be for the city to adequately cover the city and have prompt responses to those calls for service. And anything additional, we try to deploy those in our, what we call our specialized positions, the SOP team being one of those, our 2 traffic deputies who are just dedicated to those specialized positions, because those are generally very high priority for the members of the community. I mean, we can all attest to some of the driving behaviors in this city, so that we need dedicated resources, because if we didn't, those men and women who are responding to those calls, they would be stretched so thin that they wouldn't have time to target those specific areas that are a priority to the community. So would it be a stress on the staffing levels if we cut? Yes, absolutely it would. That's not to say that as the sheriff's department that we would just turn our backs to those problems. We would have to figure out a way to still address those problems, but it would be difficult, yes.
It'd be more like trying to mitigate, okay, you have some extra time today, go check out this area, which is common for them to hang out in, and see if you can help them support. But then if they get a call, you guys have to bolt and go where you have to go.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm like, right now we have the ability where people are dedicated to that, and it's been making an impact. I'm not seeing so many people on the streets. I'm not seeing a bunch of tents all over the place. I'm not seeing people in the wash. And to me, that's part of public safety. So that's why I would kind of, personally, I think we should do everything we can to keep public safety funds as much as possible, which is why I'm for this measure, because to me, I'd rather pay to have those services, to know that if my Nana calls, for an ambulance or anything, we're gonna get there ASAP, than to not have that ability. So,
Did I answer your question?
yes, you did good.
All right, I think we're like a third of the way through your questions, but okay, you said, can we cap it and earmark the 1% for public safety?
Yes, like in the future, like I know right now it's already written how it's going to be, how it's written, and it's going to be voted on how it's written.
Yes.
But is it possible that we can, like say in the next year, put forth a thing on the measure to say, hey, it's capped at 1%, or to say, hey, this goes specifically to this fund and it's not to be touched?
Yeah, so it is 1%, so there's no, it's, each measure is specific to that measure. So this is a capped at 1 because it's 1%, so it won't, it's 1%. And so there's no change to that. On the sales tax side, there is a capping of the allowed rate total. But that I think is a little bit different than the question that you're asking. But this one is a 1%, so it would never go to 1.5%. This is a 1%, always going to be 1%.
Okay.
As far as earmarking it specifically for public safety, what that means on the legalese side of this would be a special tax, and a special tax requires 2/3 vote to pass, which I totally get the idea that if it's restricted for use, that more people would say, well, I like that restriction, and so that's good, but it requires a 2/3 vote. It seems backwards to me, but a general sales tax that can be used for anything requires a 50% vote, so it's significantly lower approval rate. And going back to some of those earlier, I'm going to show this one. Jennifer, you're going to like it. Jennifer told me before I came in that this was going to be helpful. If you look at our public safety, so you're saying it would be good to restrict that sales tax for this bucket right here, $23.5 million of costs. If you took everything that we got, not only in sales tax, but add property tax in there, we're only at $20.5 million. That's everything. That's public safety only is 23.5, nothing outside of public safety. And so what I'm trying to do is point out that call that sales tax whatever you want, unrestricted, whatever, but the city spends $23.5 million on sales tax. Currently, the 1% generates $5.5 million. The projected number. They paid 23.5 on public safety. I'm sorry. Yes, public safety costs are 23.5. Sales tax that we generate to pay for that is 5.5 million. The proposed measure S, 1%, is estimated to produce $6 million. $6 million makes that number $11.5 million of sales tax, and we still have $23.5 million of costs on the public safety side. So whatever you call it, what I'm saying is we'd spend most of our money on public safety, so call it what you want, and it's public safety. What other places may do is to say, okay, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to make it a special tax. And only use it for public safety, but then they'll take their property tax that they already use for public safety and use it for something else. They just move it around.
Okay.
I feel like the city's saying, here's all of our costs. This is what we spend money on. We have a significant spend on public safety. In reality, I know that based on the, legally, we can spend the money on anything that's unrestricted, but that's what we do spend. And so if that money comes in, we will spend it to not cut public safety. And so any way you slice it, the only reason it's not restricted for use is because you have to get 2/3 of the vote in order to call it a special tax. To me, it should be reversed, where if you're saying we're only going to use it for this, you should have a lower number.
Yeah.
And if you're going to use it for anything, have a higher number, but that's not the way the rules work. So that's that one. Wilson 3, I wrote down county funding. Yes, the county, I keep going back and asking Fermin and his crew. Hey, Fermin, I keep asking for Mean, hey, does the county want to kick in more to help us finish this project? And he says, yeah, we've asked them 500 or 600 times already. They've already contributed funding along the way. And at this point, they're not really interested in kicking in more funding for that. But up through this point, we've looked at all kinds of funding sources, and they have over the course of time, it's been a multi-year project, and they have been kicking in funding because it's going to go to flood. When it's done, it's going to be part of flood's infrastructure. So, yeah, we've gone to that well quite a bit, and at this point, future not at this time is kind of the standard response that we're getting on that. But we keep asking. The by district oversight committee, I don't have anything to add on that. I think that that's a good idea, and we can put that into the mix. I don't think that language that I just read mentioned anything like that, but that seems like a potential way to set up the oversight committee. And then 15 people here. Yeah. So I know that there's a lot of interest, but these types of meetings really, I think that these types of questions get good information out. And so if you want to provide commentaries to some of those posts, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, I do.
But again, any of that information, I'm happy to provide. If you said, hey, show me backup for this number that you came up with, I'm happy to do so at any time. My contact information is on the website. I think that's all. Did I miss any of them?
No, that was it.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Lloyd Rexted, followed by Gordon Milne.
Hi.
Lloyd Rexted. I'm a pretty simple guy, so I've only got two questions. First one is, in noticing the list of services that will be cut if the 1% tax is not passed, the other side of that question naturally is, if the 1% tax is passed, how much of those services will be reinstated or will be restored? How many of those services will the 1% tax cover? That's my first question.
Okay, I'll respond to that one before you ask the second. Okay, so the list of cuts is a potential list of cuts. So from a restoration standpoint, nothing would be restored. Those haven't been cut. Okay, so those are informational to say if we can't fix it on the measure side, on the cut side, at that point those would be cut. But those won't be cut until after the vote on the measure. So. But the other component of that is, from a funding standpoint, how much of those services, and I think this was your question, how much of those services are going to be funded with the passage of that? So the estimated sales tax generated with the measure is $6 million. We currently have a budget deficit of $7.3 million, which is more than the projected revenue. But on the behind the scenes, we're doing other things. The measure is not the only fix on the revenue side. So the measure is the biggest component. If that were to go through, everything on that potential cut list would be funded, not through the $6 million on the measure, but that plus everything else that's already been done. And so everything that says these are potential cuts would be funded, and that would not be, including the to be determined amounts that weren't defined on that cut list.
Okay.
That's not to say that as Dr. Wong points out, we always need to be mindful of operating efficiently, and annually we would be going through the exercise of saying what's the best way, what are the best services to deliver to the community, and are we not just throwing away money for a benefit that's not worth it. And so those, it wouldn't be a blank check to spend, but everything on that cut list would potentially be funded. Next time around, council would still be scrubbing the budget to say, do we like what we're planning to spend on? But that imbalance would be fully corrected. Yeah.
Another behind the scenes thing, like So behind the scenes, the last year, we've taken a seriously aggressive approach to make sure we're getting all the data and information on all the services we do offer. So if and when the time comes from the top to start looking at what to cut, we actually have statistical information on, we've done this over a year, we've done 2 versions of it, how much we make this time, so then we can find out through the cost recovery that community service is working on, which services could we maybe not get to that point, or is it worth it, and kind of make choices on not just do we like it or not, but actual data and information. So we're collecting a lot of that too.
Okay. Because having been in the county for over 20 years in the educational system, I know that we were given budgets and we were told if you don't spend them, they're going to be cut back next. So make sure you spend all that money. And I'm wondering if that's the mindset. And see, we don't know if that's the mindset at City Hall because we have no way of knowing.
Yeah, so there's a great Office episode of The Office where they're doing just that. I had sent that clip to some of the department heads this time around to say, this is really funny, but in times of deficit, that's not how we do things. If you've got a budget and you don't spend your budget, that's great because it just makes the whole that much smaller going forward. And so I think that Yucaipa is small enough to grasp that concept because we're not as big as the county, we're not as big as the state, and budgets are a tool, but we're not spending every dollar against that budget. And certainly we've had the communication from the finance department pushing that out to say, hey, if you're under budget, you're under budget. Don't be finding things to spend money on because we've got a bigger issue than your budget.
And if you haven't spent everything budgeted you're to be commended for that rather than to be told. So anyway,
I was getting high fives.
My second question is, I see the list of services that are on the chopping block, and I'm wondering, along with those list of services that would be gotten rid of, what is the impact on staff and across the board within City Hall? How much of the City Hall staff will also be affected? And I think the world of the folks at City Hall. But at the same time, it seems like we should look equally across the whole budget. And maybe that's the one I was looking at. Development services, I don't know what that is, but community services and public safety are pretty explanatory.
Yeah. So development services includes, it's just I was trying to group everything together, but it's engineering, planning, code, community development, economic development, public works. And so it's 1 million to be determined. What that means is, for me, as the Director of Development Services, has to go through that org chart and figure out what are we cutting.
Okay.
A significant portion of that is staffing. And maybe a better one would be on the support services, 1 million to be determined. There's a lot of staffing that's involved in support services as well. Even in the community services, even in public safety, we talk about shutting a fire station. Well, you lock the doors on a fire station, well, you're going to save electricity because you're not using the electricity. The savings comes from the staffing involved with the facility. And so all of those those staffing cuts are included in those numbers. The facilities themselves, it turns out over the course of time, we don't properly fund the maintenance of those facilities. So cutting the funding doesn't mean anything because we don't budget for the maintenance anyways. All the savings comes from the staffing associated with all of that.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Gordon Milne, followed by Kevin Gregory.
I just have one question about the property tax and the sales tax chart.
I blame Mr. Rexstad for making me move the slides. Property tax and sales tax, that was the revenue? That guy?
Yeah, that one. why do we only get 20% of the general levy on property taxes and 1% of the sales tax?
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand that.
Okay. So on the property tax bill, there are several lines. Things like, for us, trash hauler fees are included as a line item on our property tax bill. If you live within Chapman Heights, there's another item on the property tax bill. One of those items is the general levy, and it's based on Prop 13, 1%. That's on the bill. But just because it says general levy 1%, where that money goes to is you pay the county, the tax collector at the county, then the auditor controller at the county apportions that up, and the way they apportion that up is based on what they call tax rate areas. And so there's a formula that says, of this bucket of money that we got from property tax, slice it all up, and each taxing entity gets their slice of it. The city of Yucaipa's slice is based on the tax rate area in which address pays it, and the specific number is like 20.168 for this address and 19.851 for that address. And so roughly, the way it works out is depending on the parcel that you live at, it goes to the county. The county auditor controller chops it all up and says, here you go, Yucaipa. The number is roughly 20% of the 1% goes to Yucaipa. The rest goes to other taxing areas, the county, things like that.
Yeah.
And then on the sales tax side, the reason is we would love to get more.
Yeah, that money all goes to the city, I thought.
No, a lot of people do, but it doesn't. So of the 7.75, I think 50% goes to the county. I'm going to say that wrong. Yeah, 50% goes to the county. 25% goes to SBCTA, which is the county transportation agency. 6% stays with the state, and then 1% of it we get a check for the state gives us 1% of that number.
That's not very much.
It's not very much. And so the idea of we're overtaxed as a community, yeah, I'm a CPA. I've been around taxing a lot, and I think that the federal government and the state government gets plenty.
Who makes up these rules about who gets 1% or?
We don't make up the rules and say, hey, take all the money. No, we're told this is what you're going to get, and then we take that. But the way it all falls out, the local money is 20% of the 1% of property tax and 1% of the 7 7/4. The sales tax measure, that component, 100% of that component comes back to the city. So there's no split on that. That all comes back locally.
Yeah, because also every year, the county assessor increases the value 2%.
Limited to 2%.
And if you multiply that by 1%, I don't know what it is in Yucaipa, wouldn't that cover the deficit?
No. So what Prop 13 has done, which is wonderful as a property owner, it limits the assessed value is limited to the 2% increase each year. So it limits that. But what that does is means the incremental increases that places get is capped too. And so the assessed values of all the properties within Yucaipa is much lower than the market values of all of those, and the property tax is much lower. So it's great as a property owner, but from a tax collection standpoint, it limits the amount of tax collected, which I'm fine with as a property owner. I'm good with that deal. But the reality is, what we can control locally is a fraction of the taxes that are paid. One good thing about the measure is there's no split. 100% of that tax stays local. One of the other considerations with this sales tax, and I alluded to it earlier, was there's a cap on the total sales tax that can be charged, and that cap is 9%. What? 9.25. So we're at 7.75. Our cap is 9.25. Once that cap is reached, theoretically, you can't add more to it, right? And so that capping at the 9.25 means that if another entity, SBCTA, says, hey, we're going to do a countywide sales tax increase, and there's whispers of that occurring. If we were to do that then and took ours to 8.75 based on SBCTAs, then the city would, all the community would pay the increased rate, but none of that would flow back locally. It would flow to SBCTA and then be apportioned based on where they want their transportation.
Are these rates the same for all cities in California? The 1% and the 20%?
The 1% is what's referred to as the Bradley-Burns component. The 1% of the base rate is consistent throughout. Other communities have sales tax measures, and so depending on the city, it's something more than the 7.75. As an example, Redlands has already passed a 1%. So if you go and buy things in Redlands, you're paying 8.75% sales tax in Redlands. Beaumont has not, and so like in Beaumont, it's 7.75, but there's a lot more retail opportunities in Beaumont, so their total dollars collected are 6 times the amount of Yucaipa. But one of the questions that has come up is, hey, what if people don't want to pay there's the sales tax in Yucaipa, so we go to a different city? Well, a lot of times that means, okay, you're going to go to Home Depot in Redlands because Ace doesn't have it. Well, Redlands already has the sales tax. It just goes to Redlands, not Yucaipa. So all of that is part of it. Other cities, they're not all 7.75. Other places have done sales tax measures and things like that. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
And then the 20% on the sales tax, that varies city to city. That's not the same in every city. The property tax, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, the property tax component, the 20%, is specific to Yucaipa. The tax rate areas of every community are slightly different. So, yeah.
Because we also have increased new construction that increases the value every year too. All the subdivisions, and we have over 50 restaurants and fast food places in Yucaipa.
Yeah, yeah. So our sales tax has been growing, and Ryan, got a row of Ryans here, is working with the community to expand on the retail options in town, and he's working really hard to do so. So we're doing fine, but the gap is so big that we need a massive change, and that's why we're having meetings like this.
Thank you.
Kevin Gregory and then Kim Shapiro.
It's funny you said that. It's one of my questions. Yes, Kevin Gregory, District 5, I believe. Thank you guys for tonight. Also in, was it June? That was very informative, a lot of information, or July when we did it at the YPAC.
Okay.
All that information. Local business owner, represent about 100 families that we help with our employees. Being last, a lot of the things have already been said and asked, so I'm not going to dwell in it too much. I think most of us all realize that public safety is paramount because that's why we want to live here. And cuts to that, I think, is a really drastic idea for the entire city. The use tax, or excuse me, sales tax online was a big question I had, because I think, like the gentleman who just spoke before, a lot of people don't realize everyone goes down to Costco or Sam's Club. I'm sure most people do, and we're paying that tax already, right? And the notion that we don't want to spend in Yucaipa because we're now going to have this additional tax, like you said, the other cities are getting that money already. So I think that's a big thing. So 2 questions was, yes, the online sales tax, if that's coming to us. The other question I had was any reserve, any excess. Obviously, we're still at a deficit, even if we get the approximate 6 million, you said roughly, in the sales tax coming in. Any excess in years going forward, having that earmarked, and if that oversight committee has say in that, or if it's strictly just council that has a say in that information, because we all know oversight committees are great, but sometimes you can be jack of all trade but master of none, I think is a good conversation. And really, if you want change, you have to look at who you're voting for, period. And that's not anything to say about the current or the past council. A lot of people, like you said, like to complain online, but really they need to talk to their city council person. That's a better way to get stuff done. I personally am for the Measure S. I think it's something that We all want Yucaipa to stay where it's at. There's been a lot of suggestions about cuts to community services, but incrementally or charging, to have people go to events. Incrementally, it's such a small portion of what the revenue would actually come in that it could also probably, and my question was, those community events that we do have, the Four Winds, the music festivals, those type of things, I would assume that the projected additional revenue of spending in the city pretty much outweighs the overall cost of those events. And when we look at that, if that's something that's budgeted when we are looking at throwing those type of events, because we know there's going to be excess revenue in the city, that excess revenue increases that if we're talking, again, for some people saying a $25,000 deficit for throwing an event is a lot. Really, when you see what you're reaping in rewards, maybe repeat business, someone comes to a restaurant, comes again to a restaurant, you're not really losing 25,000. So to just re-hit my questions was the online sales tax, will that help? Is that going there? Is the money earmarked? Any excess, is that going to, if there is additional excess down the line, does that oversight committee have some say in that, or is that strictly city council? And when we look at budgets, I think I'm in finance, so I love the numbers. The graphs are great. I could eat it up all day. I think when you look at expenditures, public safety, I think is still paramount and shouldn't be hit. And it's $500,000 more than what our total general spending is. I think that's the big part we have to look at is, we need to get those revenues in, and getting that sales tax revenue, I think, is an important thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the finance plug. I do it all day. It's great.
I love the numbers.
So let's start with the use tax that you mentioned. Currently, and that's what Jennifer was whispering about. The online sales, none of the online sales flows. There's no sales tax component that flows to the city. With the measure, there would be. And so that would provide the structure for the 1% to flow back to the city locally. So you think of, we don't have a Costco, we don't have a Home Depot, but what we do have is a lot of Amazon trucks in the area, and all of that online sales, there's no sales tax that's flowing back to the city of Yucaipa at the moment. That would change with a past measure where that would flow back. The other component that would also flow back, and I think that that's massive. The other component that would flow back to the city is, and this one's a little bit unique, is auto and I believe boat, DMV registration. So auto sales, if you go, Yucaipa doesn't have an auto mall, but Redlands does, San Bernardino does. If you go to San Bernardino and buy a vehicle and use a registration address of Yucaipa, that measure flows back, and even though you're buying it out of town, it's based on the registration address, and so that would also flow back to the city of Yucaipa. So I mentioned Measure S is estimated to generate $6 million. Currently, we have 1% based on the Bradley Burns that generates 5.5. And when people say, hey, if 1% equals 5.5, how does 1% equal 6? And it's not magic, it's not rounding, it's those two components, it's online sales and registrations flowing back to the city. From a earmarking excess surplus, I would anticipate that when we work through, or when the oversight group works through that and works with council on the ongoing monitoring of that, that would be a point of discussion to say, hey, when we get to the point of a surplus, which is, I hear that and I say, man, what a wonderful day. But when we get to that point, how are we going to better monitor, save, plan our spending of that? And I would think that would fall under the purview of an oversight committee. Honestly, it's something I hadn't contemplated until you asked, but I think that the oversight committee would have a say in that. So.
Yeah, the language of the oversight committee is very vague in the measure, so I wasn't sure how that gets adapted. Is that a council or is that a staff thing that helped to guide the governance of that committee? Because it's I mean, for a measure, you know, you can only read so many pages, but it is vague. It's not detailed, and you're not going to cover everything because you're not going to get it in the pamphlet guide, you know. So that's what I was curious how that was my last question, I guess, to that.
Yeah, you can tell by my last response earlier about that I don't know how the wording was derived, but
The wording was limited in that, but council will.
So council directs that. Okay.
And in the language in there, it talks about the putting in an application and the timing of the term of the everything.
Yeah, I saw the term. It was more just the general governance of it, in the sense of like, you know, the questions we're asking here that, you know, we'll never be able to put in an actual measure because it'd just be pages on pages. You couldn't think of everything. So it is a council directed item, not a staff directed item.
It doesn't say it directly.
It doesn't say it directly.
That this community, we're gonna have a process
Okay.
for it, so we can bring that up too.
Okay, just curiosity.
yeah.
Not that I don't think staff would have any problem. I just a question.
And just so you know, that's specific to the measure. Ongoing, the financial situation, the finance committee, the two council members are on that. We're having lots of dialogue, a lot of dialogue on the financial condition, where we're headed, and I would anticipate we're gonna have more and more and more. And once we get this problem fixed, that pain is gonna resonate, and they're gonna say, let's make sure we stay on track and continue those things, not only from a measure standpoint, but from a global fiscal management standpoint. So there's things that, you know, as a director, that I've got on my plate that I would like to incorporate to give council the opportunity to get more up-to-date, more timely, useful information and current status of certain things. And those are outside of the measure. That's just global, better operation from a finance standpoint.
I might have to say on the mic, but it does have structure. I wanted to make sure I got that right. There actually is specific language in there for the committee, and it's the city shall initially post and publish for soliciting applications for the people being interested as members in the committee, and shall repost and send the notice. And then it goes, the city council shall review all applications eligibility at a public meeting interview. So it will be in these chambers. They will be interviewed, those applicants, and it will be made by the council.
Agreed. So, and what I was trying to get to was the language was vague on the governance of it, how the policies run, not necessarily. It's very clear on how the committee will be set. So that's, and I think he answered that well.
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, since it's a general tax, unrestricted, again, I would argue, and I have argued, public safety is where we spend our money, so that's what we're doing. What I really hadn't contemplated was, hey, when we turn this into a surplus, what's going to govern the even though it's legally unrestricted, what's going to govern the spending of the measure? So that's something that I probably should add to my list of things to figure out. So
Perfect.
that's one of those things that it's a great problem to have once we get there. I
there.
love talking about, hey, how are we going to spend our surplus?
So, and then the final question
I know.
the final question I was trying to get an answer on was, do we look at projected benefit or revenues of the community service project, community service events, and what that actually does to our bottom line? Because again, some people see a red line for the event, but they don't see the other side of the benefit, you know. And if that's something you guys project, or is it just more of a sales tax nature of we saw this small bump?
Yes, yes, we do. We do. A lot of that comes from the department, but community services, the spend on community services in '25 is $7.7 million. The term that I haven't used tonight, but I have been using, is a net cost, where we're taking gross cost, backing out associated revenues. Community services has a lot of charges for services, things like that, offsetting revenues. Their net cost is under, for fiscal '25, is under $2 million. And so they have an offsetting revenue of 5.8 or more. And so their net cost is minuscule as far as, we said, we start with public safety. That's the purpose of the city. Start with public safety. Agreed. Community services is nice, but we start with public safety. As part of that, the net cost for public safety is really close to the gross cost of 23.5. The net cost of community services is I think it's 1.875 or something like that. 1.875, and so you look at that and go, okay, well, we have 20 times the cost of net cost for public safety. So yeah, we're starting with public safety, but squeezing that net cost is something that community services has worked really hard to improve over. And so you've heard things like, hey, we're working towards cost recovery, full cost recovery. That's unheard of in a city-run community services department. And so, but they're working hard to do that. Because that's the directive that they've given is, hey, let's focus less on the community benefit and really try to get these things penciled because that's the reality we're in.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think safety and fire take precedence, but I think a lot of conversation that the staff and or the council can also talk about is, like you said, if you're running a net loss of 1.85, I think you said maybe 1.95. Sorry, on community, there's a lot of conversation of what that actually still brings in. People that may want to move here. What happens when they move? That house sells. What happens when it sells? It gets retaxed. And now there's more revenue. So I think a talking point that I can give staff and council on Measure S and in support of it is talking about how those auxiliary services, yes, it's at a loss overall, but it's hard to measure out that, well, but the property tax went up and this went up and there's more revenue. So it's hard to budget that out in a conversation of those events that might have a net loss on the actual book. It's hard to measure out what the actual benefit is to the community.
100%, and I thought Chris did a really nice job in the video of capturing that, but I think he said something about the fabric of Yucaipa or something like that, but that really captures local government is not a dollars and cents thing. The purpose of a local government is to maximize services, and in the community services especially does more in Yucaipa than anybody close, and it really comes through in the feel of living in the community. So,
Thank you.
I agree.
Kim Shapiro, and then Sherilyn Long, and then Hanson Wong ×2. Round 2.
Put it down for short people. Okay, my first question is going to be for Captain Walker. I did give you heads up. I was going to call you out. I know that you give updates periodically to the council as to response times for your officers for calls for particular months. Mm-hmm. Has there been any projections done for what the response time is going to be if you are losing 5 of your officers?
No projections, because it's so hard to determine what time of day, what kind of call, if there's other calls happening at that time, all those factors that factor into how quickly we get to an emergency call. Generally, what I present to council each month is our response time, our average response time to emergency calls where there's imminent danger to life or property, a suspect is still at the scene, things like that. And there's so many factors that go into that. I mean, a response time at, let's say, 3 in the morning to an emergency call would likely be a lot quicker than it would be at 3:30 in the afternoon when the high school's getting out, and we have typically more calls for service going on at that time. So it would be very hard to try to pencil that out and figure out what the response time would be, other than it would likely increase our response times.
And I understand that would be very difficult to do, but I think that would really bring home the point of what losing this many officers would do to our community.
Absolutely.
Same thing, my question would be for the fire department, which I don't believe is represented today. My mother-in-law had a medical emergency at my home, and the fire department was probably there in less than 4 minutes. It seemed like it was 4.5 hours when you're waiting for them to get there. I would not have wanted to wait 2 more minutes, 3 more minutes, 30 more seconds. I mean, time can be life. So losing 5 out of 27 or 28 positions is a large percentage. And I think that's something residents have to deal with and make their choice. Hopefully, I've never had to call the police for a emergency at my home, and I hope not to, but if I do, I don't want to know that I'm waiting an extra 25% of time or 20% extra time for them to get there because we cut our services. So that's something I think the residents really need to pay attention when they're thinking about this measure. I don't like extra taxes. I'm done with you.
Thank you for being nice.
He's standing up there waiting for the next one. Waiting for the next one. It's like, I don't always get to tell the captain that I'm done with him. So I really think that the city needs to think about that. I don't like new taxes. I don't want any taxes. I don't want to pay any more taxes, but I don't want to leave police and fire either. So it's a hard choice to make, and everybody's going to have to make that choice. But you have to look at when there's emergency at your home, and I'm talking your loved one is lying on the floor having a heart attack. Do you want to wait longer? I don't. If somebody's breaking in my house and they're coming through the window, I don't want to wait any longer. So think about those things, because they do happen in our community, and we need to have the public safety that we do have. I would like to know what the city's doing to be more fiscally responsible and rather than run at a profit rather than a loss. I know houses are a financial drain overall over the course of time. So what are we doing to encourage sales tax generating businesses in Yucaipa? We need to do that. We have a freeway corridor plan with a bunch of empty freeway corridor spots. At the city council meeting on Monday, they were talking about putting warehouses in. 2 warehouses, over 200 million square feet of warehouse space. Fortunately, that was not passed. There's a lot that needs to be done if we're going to have a warehouse. If we have warehouses, I don't really want warehouses. I'd rather have shopping than warehouses if I have to have a choice. We can't just have houses. A city can't survive just on houses. There's not enough income on houses. We need stuff that's going to get us money. That's going to be businesses. If the city's going to put up warehouses, I don't know if the city's looked at this, but I haven't heard anything about if the warehouse is not a point of sale warehouse where you're not getting sales tax money off of that square footage in an area where you could have sales tax generating businesses, that we need to have some type of a annual special use fee that they have to pay per square footage so that we can get some money from that. Because the project that was put forth on Monday was about $14 million in development impact fees that they would get right off the bat, but after that, less than $800,000 a year off of over 200 million square feet of footage. 2 million. Oh, 2 billion, sorry. So, but 2 million square feet, and we're only going to get less than $800,000 a year in projected income from that. And it's taking up sales tax generating space that we could put a business that's going to get sales tax. Even if we tax them with special use fee, $1 per square foot, that's $2 million a year that's coming into the budget instead of only $800,000. In addition to the $800,000, because that's property tax money that they'd have to pay regardless. Community services are nice. I like to have community services, but we're not talking nice right now. We're talking about we're in a very dire financial strait. So if community services aren't making money, we need to really look at, do we need to have those? The YPAC is a nice building. Has anybody looked at how much could we sell that for? Can we generate money by selling that? Sell it to a business that's going to make money at it. Maybe a business that's going to generate sales tax for us as well, instead of us running at a deficit. We have over $200 million worth of buildings in the city. What other buildings can we sell off if we need to? I mean, if we're asking people to not have police and fire, maybe we need to not have quite so many nice buildings in our city, if that's what's it's gonna take. I also think on the oversight committee, if there's 5 residents, none of those residents should be employees of the city. There's been committees where
Say that last one.
none of the people on that committee should be employees of the city, okay, even if they live here, because that's a conflict of interest. Maybe not legally, but maybe morally.
And clarify why that would be a conflict of interest.
Because if they're an employee, they're going to vote for, they want to keep their job, as opposed to maybe doing what the city should be doing with that, the residents feel the city should be doing with that money.
Okay. I think that highlights the distrust with the community and city staff, but
yes.
But yeah.
For an example, wine country specific plan, which had many people on the committees for that that were also employees of the city.
Got it.
So yes, there's distrust there. That's all.
Okay, so I got a couple of questions and make sure I get them all. The first one, you mentioned when the city is going to stop operating at a deficit and operate at a profit rather than a loss. The city is not a business, and at no point would we operate at a profit. It's not the purpose of government to operate at a profit. It's to maximize service levels. And so in all of our projections, there's no item that says, hey, we're going to get a profit margin.
By profit, I meant that we could put some money back in our reserves.
Sure.
So
Okay.
that we can go through lean years again.
Yes.
Instead of just drawing from the reserves that we have that are dwindling very quickly.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so the timing of that, and again, as a employee, I don't create policy, I implement, but my understanding would be city council is going to adopt a balanced budget in fiscal 26. And so in June of 25, city council we're going to figure it out one way or another, and there won't be a deficit. We're shooting towards a balance in 26. Because of the historical conservative nature of financing at the city of Yucaipa, there's always been several reserves set up on the balance sheet. Those reserves are intact, and so when you say replenish the reserves have not been drawn down. Those are still intact. We're just eating up amounts. But the reserves specifically for, like, we have an economic contingency. We have a contingency for a disaster. We thought about tapping into it last year for Hurricane Hillary, or Tropical Storm Hillary, for that storm damage. But we were able to pull from other reserves rather than tap into that disaster reserve. So all of those things would indicate that it's not a dire situation. It's the time to get information and make a good decision moving forward. But to answer your question directly, next year's budget, my understanding is it's going to be a balanced budget. We're figuring it out one way or another, and we're able to do that because while we operate slowly, sometimes we can cut services immediately, but we do that through a proactive planning process called the budget, and say that for this year, this is how we're budgeting in those services. Next year, we're going to budget no more than the revenue that we've got to perform those services. So the second question that I wrote down was a comment on the warehouses. I'm certainly not the expert in zoning law, but I do know that the city does not build projects. The city has the zoning, and then those projects come before council to say, hey, this developer wants to do this, that developer wants to do that. And so the city's not doing that. It's just an allowable use in the freeway corridor. Warehousing is an existing allowable use. The location of it was being discussed the other night, and that's the item that did not move forward. The community services not making money, yeah, that's a common. The similar comments have been made throughout, where hey, we're starting with public safety first and figuring out the rest, and that list of potential cuts, kind of it echoes all of that. If you look at the net cost in the department, and then you look at the potential cuts, they're pretty much the net cost is what's getting cut, and so we're going back to a net zero on the community services side. So I think that opinion or that point is the consensus on that. It doesn't make it less painful, but we're in the point of making really difficult decisions. So you did have, that led into a comment of potentially selling the YPAC and what the market value is on the YPAC. When the YPAC was built, it was built knowing that it was as a community benefit, and so some of the decisions on the development of how the YPAC is set up, the number of seats, all of those things limited the financial viability, and so all of those factors are considered by a private company that would want to come in and buy it as a venue. And so they look at that and said, well, it's built wrong. We can't make a buck with that. You built it wrong. And so it limits what we built it for, nobody's going to come in and buy it and automatically make money with it. It was built as a community benefit. So if we could tear down the YPAC or somehow get the money back for it, maybe, but that's not where we're at. People that would come in, one is they have a limited opportunity to make a profit on that. The other one is the city loses control of the programming at the YPAC. And so from time to time, I will field calls to say, hey, why did you approve this event at the YPAC? And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But all of the programming at the YPAC, if the city is not managing the programming, whoever the owner is doing whatever they want there. And that to me is a significant negative, even if that makes it pencil. That means that right smack dab in the middle of our community, somebody else is saying, hey, we're gonna have this event and we don't care because we're trying to make this thing pencil. And so that also not a scare tactic, but the reality is the city can say, yeah, we're not doing that there. And so we would lose that if we gave away control of the building or sold the building. And then the other thing is selling the buildings. There's when we're trying to exit land or a building, there's a lot of legal requirements to do so. It's not as simple as a private transaction. And so ultimately, as we're talking through tonight, I believe that we have to solve the problem operationally, and I mean recurring revenues, one-time sales or one-time revenue infusions to solve this problem means we solved it. The next year, we're having meetings like this and trying to say, okay, now what do we do? And so not only is it difficult to sell and liquidate and then take that to plug the gap, but then the gap is from recurring costs. And so then what do we do next time? And so ultimately we're looking at this to say, hey, the best way to fix this is to do it one time. Do we want to cut service levels and stop spending on those levels? Or do we want to provide recurring funding to do that? And so those are we've had the discussions and they're ongoing, but in general, that's kind of where we're at the moment on some of those. Did I miss any of did I hit them all? Okay, thank you.
Sherilyn Wong, and then Hanson Wong.
I want to thank you for having this meeting and a question and answer. I did learn a lot, and we love Yucaipa, and we want to support Yucaipa, but there's such a mistrust right now, and this bill previously did not pass, and there's very little hope that it will pass again, but hearing the dire straits that we are in concerns all of us, and we really are in a difficult situation. Looking at this flyer that was printed and handed out, the cost-cutting measures if the sales tax fails, reducing the sheriff's department, closing the fire station, closing the senior center, closing the 7th Street pool, all these things that are listed here, I don't see cutting the PIO department. You referred to it at the beginning of this meeting. Why isn't that on here? You're wanting us to vote for a sales tax increase, and yet it seems that we don't need a PIO department. that has a budget of $1.1 million, correct? We have a $1.1 million budget for the PIO department.
I'm going to phone a friend and confirm the amount. It sounds materially correct.
So we could save the senior center, we could keep the 7th Street Park open, and we could keep the community center programming, which helps our most vulnerable citizens and our most needy citizens here in Yucaipa by eliminating the PIO department and the Department of Governmental Affairs at 1.1 million. Those are the kind of things that as a resident we want to see if we are going to make the sacrifice and help save Yucaipa. Not having that on here is very concerning, and again, the mistrust on where you really will be spending this money and who will really be serving on the oversight committee if we were to vote for this measure. The other question I have is, there was an increase of 22% of the BurTech franchise fee, I understand, but BurTech gets none of that, so where is that 22% that has affected all of us and has been increased, and many residents are not even aware of this yet. So this is like a quote, another tax that nobody will see until they get their property tax bill. So this is another concern that we have. Where did that money go? And has that been used to, already included in the budget, or is that going to help reduce the deficit that we have? And also, what percentage did the actual franchise fee increase?
Okay. Let me start with, I'll just take them in order. All right, so the first one is the discussion on the PIO department. As we go around town, we've gone, I don't know, 10, 15 places, and I get a kick out. Joe took my thunder, but usually we get into the Q&A and I start blaming Joe for everything, and then we all rally against Joe. But since Joe already beat me to the joke, the PIO department, on this slide, the cut services to existing revenue levels, the top one right there, support services of $1 million. The governmental affairs department rolls into the support services or general government. And so there's a $1 million deduct to be determined. And the reason for that is support services are, the only purpose of support services is to support service levels. And so what that means, what specific things will be cut within support services is to be determined. We'll figure out, okay, what are the existing service levels, and we need to retract accordingly. Whether that's...
I would much rather save the deputies and the paramedics, you're saying at $2 million, and $1.1 million PIO department for PR. I think a 911 call is much more important than a PIO department.
Yeah, and so big picture, it's a difficult question to answer, but I'm going to do my best, so bear with me. It goes into support services. The support services as a function, entire function, whether that's city council department, city manager's office, governmental affairs, finance, human resources, IT, general services, whatever that is, the purpose of that is to support everything else that the city does. Historically, which I thought this slide was awesome, when we look at that bucket of support, it's going to be good. Where is it? Right there. This one. Historically, the Yucaipa Way, I've been referring to it as the Yucaipa Way, and it's not necessarily a term of endearment, but the Yucaipa Way, we spent $5 million in 2003 in support services. We didn't spend more than $5 million until 2021 was the first time in 18 years from a dollar standpoint that we hit the 5 million. If we adjust the 2003 number for inflation, that's $8.6 million, and we're only at $6.3 million spend, including the governmental affairs department. 1.1? 1.1.
So it is confirmed that it is $1.1 million.
1.1
And we have
million.
not had this department before, and we were running very well, as you've pointed out in this slide.
$1.1 million is included in the $6.3 million. The department is new. The staffing in the department, we had a PIO previously. It just wasn't in the governmental affairs department. The city had a department that we termed non-department. It was called the non-department department, and that non-department department had the PIO in it. We said, let's call it government. It was under the city manager department. City manager? Yes. Okay. We still had a non-department department. It's called management. We do have a non-department. Okay, so I'm not totally wrong. Okay, so it was in the city manager's department before the PIO was. We had a grant and financial analyst, grant analyst. So the position was there.
That was the other thing. So I understand Joe came on as a replacement and is not a grant writer. So who is writing our grants now? How are we getting grant money?
Yeah, so all of that goes into the bucket of support, general government support. So the total spend, including the governmental affairs 1.1 million, is included in this $6.3 million. From a city operationally, big picture, if we said, hey, we've got a $7.3 million budgeted deficit this year, we're gonna start it with cutting Joe and his $1.1 million budget. Now we're saying, okay, we got a $5.2 million support spend. Our inflation adjusted number is $8.6 million. We're cutting support. We're not valuing the support from a community. We're saying all the services are provided, but we're not properly supporting them. And so
Joe is single-handedly supporting all of those departments?
Absolutely not, but the entire group of general government is based on what does it take to support everybody. And so everybody may have an opinion on how to best put together an org chart for general government. How can we best support? That person responsible for determining that is the city manager, and the city council says, we want you, city manager, to do your job and figure out the best structure. What I can tell you is big picture, we're spending 26% less than we did in 2003 for a machine that is $250 million bigger. And so if I were to say, hey, where can we tighten our belt? What I have been saying is, don't look at this ribbon. Like, this ribbon is way too thin. Tell me what services you want to cut, and we'll adjust our support accordingly. As we were going through, how do we get there if we make these cuts? I was like, we can't include support services at all. We're way too thin. But from working with the community, as you've heard tonight and all along, you can't cut public safety. But as we go to these meetings, you can't cut community services. We go to other meetings, you can't cut senior services. You can't cut, and so there's a lot of services that are really good.
But then why
services.
is that not on here?
What do you mean?
His department is not on here. It just says to be determined.
His department is on the chopping block with everybody else for that $1 million cut. And so.
Okay, thank you. You've answered that question.
Okay.
How about the 22%? Where does those BURTEC fees
So
gone?
the real increase in you ended it with a question. What is the real increase? So the dollar amount of the increase on the bill itself, I believe, is 22%. That's the mathematical calculation. The increase in the franchise fee component was at 10% and it was adjusted to 20%. So the franchise fee component itself is 20%. The change in the bill from the prior year to the current year is 22%. And I didn't check the math, but in my head that's the way that it works. This year, BURTEC, every year, BURTEC has an option to say, hey, we're going to increase our component of the bill by CPI. They said, we're going to forego that this year. It's going to be zero from the Vertex side. So the entire increase in the bill is associated with the increase in the franchise fee. Then it comes back to the city. Your other question was, is that included in the budget numbers?
Yes,
No.
currently.
No. And the reason it wasn't is because when we adopted the budget in June, those discussions haven't been made. So the way that we budget revenues is what are the known revenues? At that point in time, that wasn't a known item.
So your slides need to currently show the new fees. Now that you're giving these presentations, it should show then that the 22% should be a positive.
Should be a reduction of that deficit?
Yes.
So from, yeah, and I hear what you're saying. What I would say is the deficit that we're talking about is a budgetary deficit. The deficit at budget adoption, when council said, execute this plan, and we'll figure out where we want to go as a community before the next budget cycle. And so as we're going through that, there's a lot of different things, different moving parts, where I believe right now, as is, we're going to do better than the adopted budget as a result. But to say all your slides need to change, no, my slides are based on budgeted information. All the different moving parts are going to be part of the mix when we get to the actual rollout. And so, yeah, I agree. The point is we're going to do better than $7.3 million deficit because of the other things that we're doing without the measure. And yes, that is absolutely the case, is the 7.
Since that's passed now, so that has been approved by the city council, the 22%, how much is that? What is that figure?
2 million is coming to the city. 2 million. Help me out, people. No. What's the projected
But that's
number?
just like the property taxes and all that. You don't have that yet either, but that's going to be coming. So that's part
believe
of
that
the solution.
Yes.
And
So-
that can save the 5 to 7 sheriff's department officers.
Yeah, so
That can save the fire station.
I believe that your point is accurate in that we're going to do better. And so then the question would be when we get to fiscal 26, if we're doing better, what do those projections look like? And what do the actual cuts, if we have not a $7.3 million deficit, if we have a $5 million deficit, now what are we talking on the cut side? And so from initiation of a budget document and what cuts would look like to fill that gap and the resolution that was signed, that was all based on information at that time, and there's a lot of moving parts. This one is to the good of that situation to say, hey, when we get to the end, we may not be as bad as we were, and therefore the cuts don't need to be as drastic. That's a point well made. That is accurate. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And we are in a tough position, and so that's why we're asking the tough questions. And you're asking us to sacrifice a lot, and we want to see the same for everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned with like I said, the most vulnerable of our residents here who can't be here tonight, who don't even know this is going on. And we have to make these decisions and with a clear conscience when we vote.
Yeah.
So thank you.
The other component of that is the $7 million deficit will be better than that. But remember, that's a whittled down number. And so when we asked Captain Walker, when we asked Chief Malinowski, what do you guys need? There was a lot of stuff on there that when all of that stuff was wrapped up, including every other department, the number was $15 million, not 7. And we said, nope, kick it out later. We'll deal with that next time. And so while we'll do better than the budget, there's stuff that's not in the budget that's important to remember as well. That deferred maintenance is another one on the public works side where we've got, 85% of the list of things that we need to do at the buildings was kicked out of the budget because we're trying to make that issue smaller. So the budget is not a bad financial indicator, but it's just one, and what's not in the budget is important to understand too. And we have at least $8 million of requests that were made that never even made it to the budget. And so while we'll do better than 7.5 or $7.3 million deficit, the real issue that we're trying to correct is bigger than that one budgeted number too. So both of those things are correct. Your point is correct, and there's also things not included in the budget that typically would be if the funding was available. So.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your presentation and wish more people could have been here tonight to hear it and try to make this important decision for Yucaipa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hanson Wong to close us out.
So, thank you again for this meeting. As I understand it, we're not going to have another meeting, but this is the only one we're going to have.
We only got 15 people here. Nobody wants to see it again.
And since we're picking on Joe tonight,
Let's do it.
Brought that up, I'm going to say that, I have to consider that maybe we should connect his salary to the number of people he brings in for these meetings. I'm kidding.
Oh,
I'm kidding.
that's a good idea.
Okay.
A performance bonus is what I'm hearing you
Performance.
say. Yeah.
If I
Staff
work
is
for
excited about
commission, I
potential
will
performance
bankrupt this
bonuses.
city.
So, I'm going to talk about perception, okay? These are pennies compared to $100 bills, okay? But there are some perception problems that I see, and I'm going to say tax is going to go through, okay? When the tax goes through, are we going to make a better impression on the city? Are we going to hire replacements at a higher position and a higher salary, which the 1% is not going to cover our entire deficit unless we do something really drastic, okay? So we have to look at that, and that there are needs and wants, okay? I would like to have Taylor Swift tickets, but I have to be satisfied with Yucaipa, okay? And so the same thing occurs. It's nice to have color posters or color flyers, but maybe we need to do black and white flyers, okay? It's nice to have communication with videos from one of our council members and videos from our mayor, but are there other ways that are less expensive? Again, perceptions, pennies, but we need to make sure that the city sees that we're trying. I'm talking about non-payroll stuff. I'm not even talking about payroll items. So please consider that and make a better impression on the city by doing these things. One last thing, and then you can kick me out of here. So we criticize prior administrations for, if we build it, they're going to come, we're going to bring in loads of money, we don't have to worry, and we'll pack it in. But when the time comes that our 3 years are up for the 80 acres, we're getting the 7%, should make us happy, hopefully he doesn't default. But if we go through the 3 years, and at the end of the 3 years we say, okay, we're going to take this property at that cost, and we're going to develop entertainment issues, entertainment. And so you're saying the same thing. We built an entertainment forum, and they're going to come, and hopefully we don't get trapped in that. Thank you, and have a good evening.
So while you didn't phrase your comment in the style of a question, I'll respond. And so the first one is, what was the first one? Let's start with the second one, and then somebody can remind me of what the first one was. The second one was criticism of the prior administration, and I really don't want this meeting or any of the previous meetings to do that. Really what this is meant is to say, right now, Yucaipa, fiscal 25, we have a problem. And I understand that the first reaction is, what do you mean we have a problem? How do we have a problem? But in order to say, okay, this is how the problem has come about, I'm going back 22 years to demonstrate, based on all these trends, this is where we are today. But the purpose of all of that is to really get to the point of today, we have a problem. I moved to Yucaipa in the early 80s. Greg Franklin was my baseball coach. I saw Mr. Wood, who's now Pastor Wood, or Pastor Ron, this morning. I had my 30-year high school reunion last weekend. I've been around a long time, and I can tell you, while I loved growing up in Yucaipa, Yucaipa has a lot more and better things than the dips in Oakland Road and the oranges that you could buy at the bottom for $1, and you didn't have to pay the $1, but I always did. So that list that Fermin provided that has all of the stuff that went into Yucaipa, I think that I'm certainly not criticizing prior administrations, either the previous one or the one before that, or the one before we even incorporated. I think that Yucaipa, the history of Yucaipa should be celebrated. What I'm pointing out is we have a long trajectory of 15 years where we're headed in a direction, and if we don't make a significant change, not a tweak, a significant change, somebody else will be making the decision for us rather than the community. And so what I'm really trying to say is we have an issue right now, and in order to get everybody through the emotions of having that issue right now, I'm providing historical information, but I'm not, and Sherilyn, you were at the meeting a couple weeks ago, I'm not criticizing prior administrations. I think that the things that have been accomplished in Yucaipa with zero outside debt are outstanding. The reserves that we had in 2008 are significantly less than the reserves that we have now operating. We're blowing through that stuff. We need to make a change as a community. We can hold all the services, but we need the revenue, or we're gonna cut because we don't have the money anymore to cut. And so, but it's a big change, not a tweak, big change, and that's why we're spending the time and energy and the staff time to have these meetings and things like that. So I don't think that addressed anything other than the phrase that Dr. Wong said, that we criticize the prior administration, and I just wanted to clarify that is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to directly provide all of the factual information so that the community knows exactly what's going on. So with that, no more. Thank you very much for attending on a Wednesday night. And my contact information is on the website if you have any other questions. Happy to meet with anybody.